Good evening, school board. My name is David Jones, president and founder of the Joe Foundation. I'll shift gears a little bit tonight on some issues that I've had to deal with the last couple of weeks from phone calls from mentees of mine, from young men that play and live and go to RPS. I've had this conversation over and over with you all, and I guess it's still an issue we have to deal with. Our young men are being used, our schools are being used as springboards. Okay, you come to the city, you get your experience, and then you move to the county. I have 3 young men that called me this week and found out that their coach was leaving to go to a county school via Facebook. So for these young men that have no fathers, no coach is a big issue to them. It's a big part of their lives. So when you find out that your dad left you over Facebook, so-called coach dad leaves you over Facebook, not even have the nerve enough to come see you, that's not somebody we want represented in our schools. Huguenot, same way, in the middle of the year, just leaves. These are issues and things that I know may not seem like a big deal, but they really are, because you don't got to hear it. You don't have to see the hurt, the pain that they go through, because you really put your all into your coach. I expect I can get kids to run through a wall. Why? Because I love them, and I'm going to be there for them. Trust me, everybody wants opportunities, but if you look at the surrounding counties, Verona, great football team. I think their coach retired after 9 years. Highland Springs, 4 state championships in a row. He's been there 10 years. These are things that has to happen for you to build a program, and young men, and a program for band, cheerleaders and all, that they respect you and know that you're going to be here. So when it comes to the people that we're hiring for these jobs, we really must step back and take a good look at what we're doing and who we're putting in place for our young men and women. So again, I thank you. I pray that the school board will relook at that rule of you must be an RPS employee. I would love to serve for John Marshall and be their head coach, but I will not work for RPS just to be their head coach. I have too many things going on in life that would afford these young people opportunities to do great things around the world. I will not sit up in RPS and be a janitor or be somebody that holds a kid's hand just so I can be a head coach. So Jason, I'm begging you. I'm pleading with you. That rule has to change. Put people in place that truly loves these young people and truly will be there for them. Y'all have a blessed evening.
Good evening. My name is Gregory Gilliam. I'm an employee at Green Elementary School, and I'm here seeing on item 10 that you're going to be sending in, considering final names for the renaming of the school. This is my second time appearing. The last time was at Green when the board appeared. I've been with Richmond Public Schools 30 years and have been part of shared decision-making process and family school community partnership, and also was selected to be part of the selection committee. And with that said, that on that committee we have representatives of parents, students, community partners, teachers, administrators who participated in the process. And our students were able to engage in the naming of the school. They were able to put forward names and to vote on it, to research it, to find out about that name. The name we selected was Cardinal School. And that Cardinal School, they, in research, found out that our state bird actually flies from South America to North America. And as you may know, and many of you do know, that our school is a large population of students from Latino, South America, Mexico. And we found that that name is a name that is inclusive, that everyone can be a part of. And as a member of the committee, we don't want it just to be a committee and represented just to say, check on the box that you participated. We hope that the board really seriously consider what the students have put forward as what they want and supported by the community. I don't know what other names you may be considering, but as part of the process, the students were able to participate in shared decision-making process, part of that process. So these elementary schools, maybe one day, their children will be attending the Cardinal School that they can say, we named that school. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Megan Reimer, and I am a history teacher at Elkhart Thompson Middle School, and I'm also a member of the naming committee at Elkhart Thompson. I'm honored to have been able to assist Ms. Murphy and the ETMS community in this process. The committee of 8 members followed the school board policy and the guidelines that were set in the initial meeting. We wanted to make sure that the name was new, meaningful, and culturally relevant, that it contributed positive to the growth of Southside Richmond, and it brought recognition to Richmond. We also added that it was inclusive, easy to spell and pronounce, and relevant to our students. I'm happy to report to you that the top 3 names in accordance with the RPS policy, we've come up with River City Middle School or River City Academy, and RVA Academy, and Southside Academy or Middle School. ETMS staff was asked to break the tie, which put River City Academy at the top of the list. So, that is all.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak with us this evening? If not, then I will adjourn the public hearing, and we will reconvene our board meeting with 6.01, receive an implementation update on Priority 1, exciting and rigorous teaching and learning. Dr. Epp.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, board members, Superintendent Camrus. I'm excited to provide you an update on Priority 1, engaging in rigorous teaching and learning via our project plans that were updated in October. And to start with Action 1.1, our passion for learning, we've begun hiring a team to launch this work. We've begun planning meetings with our host principals at MLK and Henderson. We have begun, we're on our 2nd round of community meetings after receiving initial family input. And one of the most exciting things is we are in the midst of talking with every 5th grader from both feeder patterns, both elementary feeder schools to MLK and Henderson, and getting our students' input on what they really want to see in a STEM academy for 6th grade. Very excited about that work. And thus far, 40 students have applied through our open enrollment process for the STEM academies. So these are students who are out of zone. We expect once the open enrollment period is closed, we will gather interest data for families who are already zoned to both MLK and Henderson. But we're excited that 40 students out of zone have already indicated interest. For 1.2, our early literacy initiative, which is to secure early elementary and math curricula, ELA and early ELA curricula. We have launched an RFP to adopt early literacy curricula. We are close to finalizing our summer school pilot that will launch this summer to focus on very early age students, kindergarten and first graders. We have hired literacy specialists who spend, while they are they're based centrally, they spend their time in schools daily, training our teachers directly, in classrooms coaching, modeling lessons, training our teacher leads, our coaches, our assistant principals, and they are doing regular trainings for our school-based reading interventionists. And as I talked about last week during our budget cycle, our culture of reading pilots are underway as well with book vending machines. We're about to launch our bus book baskets, and excited just to get books in our students' hands to promote reading. For Action 1.3, which is our upper elementary and middle school math and ELA curricula, that process, the selection and procurement process, is also underway, and we expect this work to be completed early spring so that we can begin the rollout of this work before teachers leave for summer break. Similarly, we've hired specialists in math, additional specialists to support both our intervention programs around mathematics as well as literacy to ensure that students have support so that they can access the grade level curricula. 1.4 speaks to equity in our advanced programs. Some updates there. We have, just want to make sure folks are tracking here. Some highlights for 1.4, we have hired and onboarded our college and career pathways manager, and she has begun that work with all due speed. We've convened a master scheduling working group that will issue guidance to families around course selection, highlighting how our middle school courses and course selection impacts high school options. We'll initially capture that in our middle school program of studies, which you will see later this month, and we anticipate a more comprehensive family guide early fall, well before the open enrollment and specialty school process begins. We've also conducted a significant number of information sessions and outreach to families across the city, including targeted outreach with La Comunidad and our Latinx community to target families who are ELL students and our Latinx students where we have gaps in those programs. And then finally, though not explicitly in our project plan, we've also tackled equity in the process we use to do early screening for gifted and talented, where every second grader is given the COGAT. So we found that students in our underperforming schools in certain parts of the city were very unlikely to be referred or nominated to gifted and talented programs. And so by administering a universal screener, we feel that we'll be able to identify students more equitably, particularly from our under-identified schools. For special education 1.5, we are in the procurement process to secure an external partner to do a review of our referral, IEP services, and placement processes. And we're projected to be on track for later this spring. We've also relaunched our SEAC, our Special Education Advisory Council. Our meetings are the third Thursday, our next one is the third Thursday of February. We have those scheduled for the rest of the year, and you can see that on our website. We also plan to have a new committee leadership established where teacher leaders and parent leaders are selected, And we are recruiting SEAC ambassadors from every school to represent their schools on the SEAC, where they will receive a stipend. So if you know folks at our schools, please encourage them to apply as a SEAC ambassador. For 1.6 for our English language learners, we've been, significant progress has been made here. We've staffed up our team. We have published our ESL manual. We instituted new processes in partnership with the Welcome Center and the VDOE to identify and validate our English learners to ensure that they are appropriately identified, screened, and placed. So much that we had, if you'll look at our revenue sheets, we have a 1.6 million increase in state revenue earmarked for serving our ELL students compared to last year, which we attribute directly to an improvement in our identification and placement processes. We have launched our advisory council through La Comunidad, and our newcomer academy proposal is underway and is in the process of getting stakeholder feedback as we speak. For 1.7, for our alternative education and to reimagine that, as I shared at the beginning of the year, we really needed to first hire the right person for this role in order for this work to start. We expect to make this hire by the end of the month based on finalists, and their first order of business will be to complete a comprehensive landscape scan of current programs and services and identify gap areas in terms of where students have needs that we're not currently serving, or where we might need to redesign or reimagine our alternative services. I want to also flag that we've identified, much of these are to travel to best practice sites, and we have identified efficiency based on some of the feedback from last week. We plan to travel to one city to learn, to see excellent schools around our passion for learning, our special education services, our newcomer academy efforts, as well as our alternative education efforts. So we plan for that to bear fruit. And then lastly, in terms of our early childhood work, we have 2 out of our 5 sites have dedicated instructional leads, and we're in the process of hiring those remaining leads. That is taking a little longer than expected as we partner with our VDOE partners to flesh out the job description to reflect the role that we really need, and we are looking to make those roles more like a principal than an instructional coach to enable the instructional evaluation and supervision that also needs to happen. So those are, and the transportation updates, I think you guys have received significant updates on those in the past. So that's our priority 1, project updates. Thank you, Sade.
Thank you, Dr. Epp. Mr. Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a few questions for you. The first is with respect to Passion for Learning 1.1. I'm really excited to hear that we've got movement on planning for these specialty schools. Just had a meeting at Carver Elementary with a number of stakeholders who are really interested in getting discussion going about what a specialty program at that school will look like. I understand that a lot of the significant effort from the administration will have to focus on some of these schools that will be coming online sooner, but I'm curious to know what thoughts the administration may have about support they can provide for information gathering and for facilitating discussions with community members. I got a lot of great feedback at the first meeting, but it would be great to have some folks from the administration or some place that people can go to provide feedback for ideas for a program at a school like Carver or any other schools that may be coming online in later years.
We're excited to engage in those conversations. I think as we map out the time, I think the first step is to map out the timeline in terms of where the elementary school sort of specialty programming fits alongside the remaining middle schools as well as the high schools. And so in terms of priority and sequence and what year those should launch, I believe we're waiting to prioritize based on once we have a multi-year plan and what will come first. So I just in full candor, resources are rather limited, but I want to engage in those conversations, but I want to make them timely in terms of when our public commitment is for those specialty programs to launch.
Mr. Camrus?
Yes, so we have publicly committed to launching the Carver Magnet School in the fall of 21. We will maintain that commitment, and we will work to figure out a way to gather initial thoughts and feedback from the community about that over the course of the spring, with the knowledge, of course, that we have to focus our energies right now on MLK and Henderson, and once those are up and running, can certainly pivot more directly towards the Carver community, and for that matter, the Bellevue community, which we also publicly committed in a similar fashion. So give us a little bit of time to figure out a way to tap into that very excited community interest so that we can begin to mobilize folks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Page?
Yes, I have a broader question. Priority 1, action 1.2, literacy. This is for the superintendent. When can we expect to see the data from the pilot program, from the literacy, from the pilot sites? Because if this pilot is working as we expected, putting more resources there. So I wanted to know, when can we expect to see some data around that?
Yes, so our MAP testing, which is our best interim assessment data, will be available over the next couple of weeks. So our goal is to, as soon as it's all available and we're able to analyze it and present it to you, we will do that. We are tentatively scheduled to do that at our very first meeting in March, just because of the time when the data will be released by MAP. As for pilots, I'm going to defer to Dr. Epp. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring.
No, for an example, Blackwell.
Yes.
There
You're
was
talking
a,
about the reading mastery, or? I'll let Dr. Epp speak to the specifics.
I think you are referring to the literacy lab effort.
Yeah, literacy.
Okay, the literacy lab effort is not a pilot per se, but has been in our schools for a few years, sort of before our time. That is partially funded by the state, so the state funds some of our literacy lab sites, and then we fund the remainder through our early reading intervention initiative that also comes from state dollars. We are looking at data from those sites, however, to ensure that that is in fact working. And so each year before we renew that partnership with the Literacy Lab, we do a data review. And so I did that earlier last summer before this fall. But I'd be able to give you a mid-year report, as Mr. Camrus mentioned.
So maybe I'm getting this a little confused, but I was under the assumption that there was a pilot reading at Blackwell and some other sites.
You might be
And
referring to Reading Mastery.
if that's a pilot, okay. So when can we expect to see the results? And if the expected outcomes are what we,
Absolutely.
expect to see, how would that have play in the budget?
Absolutely.
And putting more resources district-wide versus, a few schools?
Absolutely.
Because if it is working, then it needs to be a district-wide
Expanded.
push.
Absolutely. So when we present the data, mid-year data for MAP and PALS, PALS is the early reading data, we can break that out by either unique programs or pilot programs by school. So that's data that I can include in our presentation next week.
Okay. Ms. Dorr, then Mr. Barlow.
Hi. So in regards to the STEM academies and passion for learning more generally, it's exciting to hear that there's an increase in open enrolled students, but I guess if you could refresh my memory on the STEM academies and how that's working within the school, and what our plans are with all of these magnets. One of the things that I think is a cautionary tale from magnet schools is creating a school within a school, in which it doesn't necessarily reflect the demographics of the community if the program isn't offered to all the students in the school. So what are we doing to avoid that?
Sure. So first, I think language matters. Magnet programs tend to imply merit-based or application-based programs. These programs are not. These are fully open enrollment, lottery-based programs. So I think that's an important distinction. And at Henderson, the vision is to start with the full sixth grade model, full sixth grade cohort, and create that full school model from 6th and then scale up to 7th and then 8th with that initial cohort. For MLK, the idea is to start with because MLK is significantly larger than Henderson, to start with a cohort of 100 students, and then the idea is to scale that to a full school model. And Principal Dabney, who I think has experience firsthand in her previous experiences as a leader, some of the downsides of schools within a school, we've talked explicitly about that and the importance of naming on the front end that this is not to be designed as an exclusionary program, and it is not designed to be, while definitely special and exciting and unique, it is designed to be a pace setter rather than a totally separate thing. So we just want to start a little smaller given the size of the school.
Okay, Mr. Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, and that's very helpful context on Ms. Dorr's question, so thank you for that feedback in particular. You did mention a fully open enrollment model. My assumption is that we'll still have zoned students attending these specialty programs, right? Okay. And then two other quick things. One is with respect to the forthcoming literacy curriculum. You mentioned that there's an RFP issued at this point. Would
Correct.
you mind sharing that with the board so we can take a look?
Sure.
Awesome. And then the other thing is, because I have been getting questions about literacy plans moving forward, so it'll be helpful to understand sort of what that framework looks like. And then with respect to action 1.5, and I'm sure we already intend to do this, but it would be great to get the reports and recommendations related to special education issues put on our agenda when they're available. So you mentioned that there's a special education advisory committee as well as there's a contractor we're bringing in to assess as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, so it would be great for all of us to have an understanding of what we're dealing with when that information is available.
Absolutely.
Dr. Sapini.
Thank you. As we talked about pertaining to the data for map testing and things of that nature, now that we've passed the mid-year mark with the end of the second 9 weeks, just in a matter of correlating the academic data, I'm hoping that we would get the attendance data sooner rather than later, because that can also give us an indication as to where our students are and where they're going to be toward the end of the year. I know we've asked about this before, but we still haven't gotten any data pertaining to attendance, and so I'm wondering when will we get that?
Yes, the goal right now, as I shared earlier, is at the March, is it 3rd? The very first meeting in March. The window for MAP just concluded?
It closes this week.
This week, sorry. There's a couple more days. I'm sorry, did you mean
Attendance.
attendance?
Attendance.
Sorry, I thought you said attendant too. My apologies. We have the attendance data coming. Second board meeting in March. That's when it's scheduled to come.
Okay, thank you, Dr. F.
Thank you very much.
And 6.02, an update on dreams for RPS Goal 5, AP and algebra enrollment.
Good evening again. This presentation is to present an update on our Goal 5 around equity in academic achievement. We'll go to the next slide. So Goal 5 addresses student academic outcomes by subpopulation, by race, economic status, ELL status, and IEP status. When we assess this goal, we are looking at 4 grade-specific assessments. For elementary students, we are looking at performance on the 3rd grade reading SOL and the gaps across subgroups. For middle school, we are tracking middle school algebra enrollment and performance, and updating that slightly to include geometry as well, since the spirit is around access to advanced classes. For high school students, we are tracking AP enrollment and performance, and also for high school, 4-year on-time graduation rate. For tonight's presentation, for all of these measures, our goal is to reduce the gap between our highest performing subgroup and our lowest performing subgroup by 1/3 over the next 5 years. And for tonight's presentation, I want to focus on middle school algebra and AP enrollment for high school. So first, to start with middle school, we actually decided to include data on both Algebra 1 and geometry because we do have students that are on an accelerated course. So the data you're seeing here includes 7th and 8th graders total who are or were enrolled in either in algebra and or geometry in their middle school years. And so you can see over the past 2 years, we have dramatically increased the number of students enrolled in these courses overall and across nearly every subgroup. We saw a slight dip this year in our Hispanic student numbers, and we'll get to that later, but over the last 2 years, we've had a consistent increase in the number of students. We've also seen a consistent increase in the percentage of students, and percent allows us to account for changes in enrollment or the denominator. So as we increase percentages of student population, the end size may be different year over year, which is why we also look at percentage. And again, we can see a pretty clear trend in improvement in terms of the percent of students enrolled in algebra and geometry. This includes all 7th and 8th graders who take algebra and geometry over all 7th and 8th graders. Now, most 7th graders do not take either of those courses, so if we just counted for 8th graders, these percentages would be slightly higher, but this does include the 7th graders as well. And then if we look at trends by school, by middle school, we've also seen a consistent improvement over the past 2 years. And we benchmarked the past 2 years because that was when our equity audit findings were released. And so, again, we've seen this improve across every school. We still have a long way, we believe we have a long way to go in terms of closing gaps and also increasing percentages of students enrolled by school here. But we do think we see clear progress. So our takeaways really for Algebra 1 and Geometry Middle School is that we really are, I think, excited that our enrollment is up over the past 2 years. However, we have seen one subgroup, our Latinx students, fell slightly back, and we want to investigate that further. And with respect to subgroups, we are pleased to see some narrowing. For example, in the 17-18 school year, the gap in enrollment between white and African American students enrolled in algebra and geometry was 17 points. The gap was 7 points. This school year, that same gap is down to 5 percentage points. So there's a great deal of work to do in terms of closing the gap, but we are seeing the needle move in the right direction. I think I also want to flag that we do have enormous disparity across our middle schools in terms of Algebra 1 enrollment, and we see the lowest enrollment numbers across our comprehensive schools at Henderson and MLK, even controlling for the fact that MLK is roughly twice the size of Henderson. And I think this data further supports that we've made the right decision to introduce radical change at these two schools through our STEM Academy. In terms of our next steps, looking to the 2021 school year as we release master scheduling guidance, which is underway, we will formally eliminate any entry requirements for students wishing to enroll in Algebra 1. Though we have been messaging that, we want to make sure that we really are ensuring that any legacy practices have come to an end. We will also work with each individual middle school to set enrollment targets to increase participation for underrepresented groups. And so every school, based on where they are, will set a goal, a growth goal. We also want to ensure that our middle school counselors actively promote the benefits of advanced math coursework to our families and the impact that that has on students' opportunity to apply and even be considered for specialty programs, but also more broadly to Algebra 1 is seen as a, for lack of a better term, a gatekeeper course in terms of high school and college success. And we also plan to staff this accordingly to ensure that our middle schools, the new positions that you see in our budget, will ensure that our comprehensive middle schools have the staff required to ensure we are able to offer these courses. And we want to dig in a bit more into our Latinx participation and figure out what's going on there and respond accordingly. For our AP results, we, again, just to recap AP, advanced placement are courses that students typically take between 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, most often 11th and 12th, they're not exclusively. And research shows that when students take these courses, they're more likely to graduate from college in 4 years and compared to their peers who did not. And students report, even if they did not pass an AP exam, they are better prepared for having taken the course. The Education Trust 2 years ago told us that we had significant gaps in course offerings between our specialty schools and our comprehensive schools. We saw that AP access was extremely limited for certain subgroups of students, including students with disabilities, English learners, and Latinx students. And we had less, in high schools other than open and community, we had less than 10% of our students taking an AP exam. And since that time, and when we've invested in ramping this up, we have increased the number of AP courses offered at RPS by 50%, from 43 courses to 65 courses in just 2 years. So we're extremely proud of that work. You can see the number of courses offered by each high school. And I do want to flag that we still have much more work to do, particularly at our larger comprehensive high schools. Our larger schools should be able to offer a broader array of courses, and so that's something we have to tackle. We also continue to see, just to give you a sense of the range of courses that are offered at each of our schools, we do give our students a fair amount of options here, sort of across the board. I want to note that Thomas Jefferson, we did not include in this count, although students do offer, we do offer IB diploma program courses to our 11th and 12th graders at Thomas Jefferson High School in lieu of AP courses. And any student can take those courses, any 11th and 12th grader can take those courses. An IB diploma program is considered, I would say, a national and international equivalent in terms of rigor and being accepted for college credit just as much as AP is. So we do not believe it makes sense to duplicate those offerings at TJ. In terms of numbers of enrollment by subgroup, this is the number of students that have taken one or more AP courses over the last 3 years. And again, you can see that we've increased the total number overall by nearly 200 students. And we've increased that number across nearly every sub-pop, and certainly since our baseline in 17-18. And so we are excited about the direction that's going. The percent, though, points to, while we have continued to make progress here, and we have a greater percentage of students taking AP classes now, 5% more than 2 years ago, and we are seeing increases in enrollment across subgroups, we see the gap growing because our white students are continuing to ramp up their access to these courses. You know, there's a fair number of students who identify as other, and so we don't know exactly, we can't really get a read on that subgroup, but we are concerned about the gaps here. So we want to do two things. We want to continue to increase enrollment across the board, and we want to close the gap among subgroups in terms of access. In terms of next steps and takeaways for our AP courses, again, we are excited that we've dramatically increased our course offerings by 50%. We do have more work to do in some of our comprehensive high schools to increase that number even further. Of note, a point of pride, George Wythe now offers 11 AP courses compared to just 3 2 years ago. And we've also seen AP enrollment increase in every subgroup over the past 2 years. And again, similarly as with algebra, we want to investigate a slight decline in our Latinx AP enrollment and continue to address our subgroup gaps. Similar to our algebra work, this is first and foremost, access and taking courses is all about course offering, educating and informing our students and families as to the benefits, and really about master scheduling and ensuring that we are staffing for the courses we want to offer and provide to our students. So again, we will ensure that we've eliminated any entry requirement for AP, assuming the prerequisites have been met. We believe we've communicated that expectation, but want to ensure that there are no legacy practices. We will set individual enrollment targets for each high school. We will work with high school counselors to promote the benefits of AP to students and families. And again, we do have new AP positions in our strategic plan budget for next year, which will go to those comprehensive high schools. And we will look into the decline in our Latinx population and act accordingly.
Ms. Page, and then Ms. Gibson, and Ms. Burke.
Dr. L, thank you for this information. Couple of questions. What do you think, and I know you touch on some of what do you feel like has attributed to the increase in participation in algebra and geometry? Can you?
What do I think has contributed?
Yeah.
I mean, I think first and foremost, expectations. You know, one of Mr. Cameron's 100-day priorities was to launch the AP for All initiative. And with very little staff in those early months, we did get a very nascent effort off the ground and kind of quickly turned our attention to challenging high schools to add more AP courses. So for example, we had never offered AP Spanish language on the South Side, despite having many, many students for whom Spanish is their first language. We added that course in the 18-19 school year. So I do think expectations goes a long way. Secondly, we've just continued, we've continued to promote and push principals in their scheduling to offer AP courses and to encourage students to take the challenge. And then third, in our AP for All initiative, we've provided student study sessions so that students feel that they have support. We've provided extensive opportunities for teacher training, for teachers to go to professional development, not just during the summer, but during the school year. And we've also provided training to our principals and counselors around how to utilize our PSAT data to identify students who really could be stretched and benefit. So trying to take away this idea that AP is for a certain elite few, and that our students can rise to the occasion when we set the expectations and give them the support.
So at the appropriate time, I think this will be, information to be helpful for the board to see with all of this work, have we increased our percentage and enrollment in our specialty schools? Also, percentage of qualifying scores for the AP exams. And because all of this work, are we seeing the outcomes for our students? And also adding for the participation in the algebra and geometry, are we also talking to our elementary school students and counselors and the staff, just because it needs to be introduced as early as elementary school?
I can definitely add that feedback to include our elementary counselors in some of these conversations. Thank you.
Ms. Gibson, and then Ms. Burke, and then Dr. Sapini.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So obviously the things that stand out is both the English language learners and our students with IEPs. And I think what I want to emphasize is, while I recognize that the data reflects inequity in terms of ensuring that these more advanced classes have been served up or being offered to students. But I also think that the data reflects really true foundational issues in the services and programs and the execution of education for both students with IEPs and with our English language students. And I'm thankful that the budget includes the 10 additional, staff members, but I really think that we have to go further than that. And given the level of gap between those two subgroups, particularly as we look at our budget, I think we should feel take a really critical eye to ensure that we are putting the necessary resources towards those two groups. I'm thankful that my colleague, Mr. Barlow, has reiterated the request for an agenda item. This is something that I think has been overdue for us to really talk about the program comprehensively for both of those subgroups. I just think that there's a lot more to be done.
Absolutely.
Okay. Ms. Burke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for this. I like to see numbers. I feel better when I see the data, as Dr. Sapini stated earlier. I'm concerned. I have 3 questions. First of all, when I see my dear Armstrong move from 5 to 8 AP classes, but I want 11 or 12.
Absolutely.
And I want to know what the plan of action per se is in place to make sure that Armstrong has that opportunity. I'm looking at the listing, and I see a trend across every school every high school needs to have advanced math classes, such as your calculus, your, especially those children who are planning on being in the workforce, of course, or as well as going to college. But then I see Franklin Military. What's that about? From 1, these are awesome schools. From 1 to 3, great, but it should be more. So can you answer this for me, please? Number 1, how are the classes chosen to be at the high school? Who chooses the AP courses? Where is that decision? Is that from the administration, or state recommends, or how does that come about? And then my other question is in regards to the low numbers of classes being offered in 3 of the schools.
Yes. So I share your desire to have more. The way courses historically are chosen is we provide, we have been pushing high school principals to add these courses to their schedule. And what ends up happening is I think there's a blend of student interest, or what we call course requests. There's teachers who have interest and or the ability to teach the course, and or the willingness, and also have to be willing to get, you have to go through a very simple AP kind of endorsement process. It's not cumbersome, it's not sort of complicated, but you sort of have to submit you have to be willing to submit your syllabus and the like and show that you've gone to a training. So I do think staffing can be a limitation, not numbers per se, but certification area. So what we're doing, the pivot we're making this year is first we're setting goals around so there's there's a set of standard courses that we want every high school to offer, and we need to staff to that, not the other way around. We need to recruit to that course, not the other way around. And we're setting goals with each individual principal. So our high school principal director will sit down with principals at these schools and say, look, we've got to increase your number of course offerings, and let's talk about, and our curriculum instruction department, through me, will give guidance on what we think are the most prudent course offerings based on our ability to support those courses. So that's what we'll do slightly differently this year at each of our high schools. I think, Franklin is a small school, and I think smaller schools struggle, but Open is also small. And so I will be, I want to talk with Colonel Hudson about what he sees as the challenges and limitations, and we'll work with him and his staff to sort of think through that. But we will be setting these individual goals with each school so we can appreciate their unique challenges, but also push the envelope on enrollment. Did I answer your second question?
You did.
Okay.
But I have one more, if I may, Madam Chair. IB. The IB program at TJ. So Thomas, that is not a full school program, correct?
It is and it isn't. I can explain. The middle years program, which are grades 6 through 10, right. So the 6 through 8 is at Brown, the 9, 10 is at TJ. Mm-hmm. That is both an application-based program, but the design of IB middle years is that it is to be full school. Right. So in theory, if you're any student in any of those grades at that school, you should receive the same IB middle years experience. I would be remiss if I didn't say that's not where we are yet. And we're doing a revamp at each of those sites to shift that sort of legacy of the school within a school, some of the unintended consequences. At the diploma program, which is 11th and 12th grade, IB diploma program, there are application students who can apply throughout, through the process, as well as any student who's zoned there may take IB courses. And I've confirmed that multiple times with our principal, and that we do have many students who are not technically IB diploma program students, but do take the IB courses. You can take them one-off. IB is most powerful as a comprehensive program. That's sort of how it's different in the design of AP. It's meant to be a comprehensive experience, but students can take individual IB courses for college credit.
That's what I wanted to hear, college credit. Thank you.
Dr. Sapini, then Ms. Dorr, then Ms. Page.
Thank you. She already answered it. Thank you.
She already answered it. Okay, Ms. Dorr.
Hi. 3 things. One, to follow up on Ms. Burke's question, I would like to request an agenda topic at a future meeting about IB in general. I feel like I had a meeting today about IB, and I feel like we say that we have IB, but we don't actually uphold all of the great things that IB has to offer. So either we should decide to do it and do it well, or reconsider other things, because I'm worried that the IB program in general is suffering. So for Madam Chair. Second, on all of this data, I do think it would be helpful in the future to show it normalized for size. So if we could have, like, the number of classes per school is a good metric, but showing it number of classes per student so that we can understand, is this a factor of the size of the school, or is this really a factor of inequity? And then third, I have heard from a couple of teachers that last year we eliminated honors U.S. history and honors government, and there might have been an unintended consequence where students that were fine with taking honors classes but maybe not ready to take an AP class are now in a general ed class, so you kind of miss some of those middle students, at least from teachers' perspective. So I would love to make sure that we're not having any unintended consequences about pushing students, making room for AP classes, but then losing out on the honors level students that might have benefited from those classes.
I will say there's some AP courses where it doesn't make sense to offer, you wouldn't take honors and then take AP. It just wouldn't make sense from a course sequence, and history and social sciences is one of them. And I'll definitely do some more thinking on that. But I would say I would definitely still encourage those kiddos. I'm sure those kiddos can do it. And I would encourage them to take the challenge. Colleges, I do think there's still this mindset that GPA is the end-all be-all, and that's all that colleges look at. And what college admissions officers will tell us time and again is that they are looking at the level of challenge that students are putting upon themselves, and college admissions officers will often want to see a B student taking advanced courses than an A student taking others, and honors courses do not have a universal level of rigor the same way AP does. So, but I will definitely look at that with any other courses. I'll take a closer look at that. Thank you.
Ms. Page and then Dr. Sapini.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with the sentiments my colleagues have stated. There needs to be a push to level the playing field, because if you look at community and open, the number of the student enrollment, and the number of AP courses in comparison to our comprehensive high school, which our student enrollment is more, there needs to be a big push for our AP courses. And just like we have, we're raising the bar for our students, we also need to set expectations for our teachers to encourage them to take the training, to teach AP courses, because we can't set the expectations for the students and don't have the same for our staff, because it needs to go both ways. So there needs to be a big push to level the playing field. Because you look at Huguenot, John Marshall, Armstrong.
And we will certainly make that push.
But we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we'll make that push, and I know our teachers have been fantastic and really being eager to take advantage of the professional development we're offering, and so we'll continue to do that this summer and throughout the year. So I really am proud of the work our teachers have done over the last 2 years, and I think this is a really good jumping off point to push it even further.
I'm not knocking our teachers, but again, it's still expectations go both ways.
Absolutely.
Okay, before I get to Dr. Sapini and Ms. Cosby, I understand our student has to leave us. Ty, do you have any farewell words for us?
Well, I'd just like to thank you all. All right, I'd just like to thank you all for allowing me to come speak at one of your meetings, and it's been great. So I look forward to what you have next to offer. Thank you.
Before you go, can you just share the AP classes you're in?
Okay, so at the moment, I'm in AP Research and AP Government. Yes, and I took a bunch last year.
Yeah, can you list those off?
Oh, yes. So last year, I took AP Seminar, AP Biology, and AP Literature, AP Language. And then this year, I take AP Literature. And then my sophomore year was AP History. Seminar. Yeah, it was last year. Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Sapini.
Thank you. Dr. Ebb, thank you for this breakdown with the number of students. But I was hoping that we could possibly get if we can get a breakdown of the number of students for each high school.
In terms of total enrollment?
Excuse me?
In terms of total enrollment?
No, that's taking AP classes.
I think we have, maybe I'm not showing the right one. Is it
At each of the schools?
by school?
Right. Because while we offer these, I'm just wondering, you know, how many students are able to take advantage of these?
Number of students by school. You have the percentage by school. Number of courses, I see. Yes, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Cosby?
Thank you. Is it someone? Okay, great, thank you. And I know you were very specific in terms of this report, what you, the subject matter, but I would ask for our next meeting or sometime in the very near future, that we also look at, when we're talking about equity, get a good sense of what we're doing on the elementary level, because we have, you know, there's certain schools where we see a very alarmingly low number of students who are taking algebra and geometry, et cetera. But how do we make sure that we're preparing them before they get into middle school? So it's not something that you're just, okay, we want to make sure that you take algebra, but there has not been that foundation. So, you know, we used to talk a lot about gifted and talented, but we know in many of our schools that African American children were 6 times more likely to be overlooked for those types of opportunities. So whether we have that type of pedagogy throughout school, a school-based type of situation, so what exactly we're doing. So I would like to see that at the elementary, what we're doing at elementary level to provide the foundation as we go into middle and high.
Okay. Thank you.
I have one quick thing before we move on, and that is you didn't list at TJ the IB classes that are available to our students there. So, and I'm sure you don't have them just in your head, but I would really be interested to see how their opportunities line up with these other schools.
We can provide that.
Ms. Gibson?
Thank you. I think the point that Ms. Cosby brought up is really critical, and I know there was lots of discussion about the metrics as part of our goals, but if my colleagues agree, I do think it's critical that we revise the document so that that data is captured, because I think when we are thinking about it from an equity standpoint, elementary school is perhaps the most critical place, because you know, because that's really where you're going to see a lot of potential bias, I think, because, you know, because at that age, I think that there really is opportunity for lots of kids to be able to participate, both in the space program and in programs like Mind Games. So I think that would be really important data to capture.
Okay. All right, thank you, Dr. Epp.
Thank you.
And now we move on to 6.03, the update on Dreams for RPS Goal 6, satisfaction.
Good evening.
Yeah, I've got that song going through my head.
All right. Well, I am here to provide our annual update on one of the 3 subgroups that we're looking at as we consider satisfaction. Tonight we'll be specifically looking at teachers and staff. Go one more. Yes. So as you likely recall, Goal 6, in addition to teachers and staff, does also address student satisfaction and family satisfaction. Both of those subgroups will be assessed in late spring, May-ish. As we think about how we measure, though, teacher and staff satisfaction, You likely recall that we created an index of 7 or 8 questions, depending if you were a staff member or a teacher, that described various domains of satisfaction, things like safety, things like respect, things like relationship, culture, etc. Initially, we pulled many of those statements from the VDOE working conditions survey in order to also address survey fatigue and not be asking our teachers the same questions in multiple formats. As it turns out, last year was the first year that the VDOE administered the survey, and then they opted to take a break from continuing to administer the survey. So they did not have that this year, but are gathering feedback from divisions around the state in developing a new survey. So because they were not going to administer the survey this year, we took the opportunity to ask our teachers and staff the index questions that we had used as our baseline from last year. Ooh, not quite yet. You could just go back, Sade. I just need to look at those numbers at the bottom. Great. So the survey remained open for about 2.5 weeks, from January 8th through the 23rd, and we had an impressive response rate of about 75%. Over 2,100 teachers and staff responded. This also was a notably increased response rate from last year. Thank you. So just to draw your attention again to what the specific questions are, they're there on the screen. I won't read them to you, but staff answer the first 7, and teachers have the additional question that's number 8. And the way that we determine if a staff member or teacher is satisfied is by looking at all 8 questions or all 7 questions. Do they agree or strongly agree with 75% or more of those index questions? So it's not an average of the 8 questions, it's an agree or strongly agree response with at least 75% of them. So as a reminder, when we baselined this work last year, we knew we had work to do. We came in at a teacher-staff baseline of only 35%, but set a goal over the course of Dreams for RPS to increase that satisfaction by 20% up to 55% at the end of the strategic plan. Well, I'm thrilled to share that we have not only met, but exceeded our target for the 1920 school year. Our target was a 5% increase to go up to 40%, and we've increased as a division 10 percentage points over our baseline. If you'll go to the next slide, we can see how that breaks down by the different groups. So again, for all employees, we moved from 35% last year to 45% of employees agreeing or strongly agreeing with those index questions. And as you look at that for both teachers and staff, we're seeing notable increases there, 9% increase in the satisfaction of our teachers and a 6% increase in the satisfaction of our staff. If you would like to drill down just a little bit further to see where those changes play out in the biggest way, I think you'll see some of those most notably around respect. And so you'll see, we look at teachers, where last year we had a more notable response rate. We've got a 12% increase to over 2/3 of teachers feeling respected by their peers and other adults in the building. We saw a 10% increase up to 62% by feeling respected by their administrators. And then another 10% increase to 56% of feeling respected by students. So I think those are all things to be quite proud of as we think of culture and climate in the building. And I'll take any questions.
Mr. Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Udasco, for this update. It's encouraging to see trends pointing in the right direction, so I'll commend the administration on that and the RPS community, but I do have some questions about the data.
Yep.
First, is with respect to response rates. Can you provide more insight about what these response rates were last year versus this year?
Yes, so the teacher response rate went up about 10%. So if you go back one more, it was at 70, nope, right there. It was 74% this year, so it was in the mid-60s last year. I can get the actual, but I know it went up about 10%. Last year, as you may recall, when we first presented this data, we had not done a concerted effort to survey staff. And so that is actually almost a baseline there. Even though on the last slide you'll see an increase, we only had about 200 staff members share the data last year because the focus, since it had come from the VDOE, had been the sense it had just been for teachers.
Gotcha. And then, and thank you. And then to follow up on that, you mentioned that this was administered by RPS as opposed to the state. Is that right?
That's correct.
So, and this is, admittedly, I just went through a review process at my own company where I had to review my satisfaction. Fortunately, I'm satisfied where I work, but I could see how an employee in that situation may be a little less forthcoming with data being provided directly to an employer versus a state entity, and I'm just curious to know what assertions we make on the front end that information will be kept private and not be used to identify particular individuals and things of that nature, so that we know that this data has significant integrity and is useful to us.
Yep. We did share with folks that it would be anonymous. I'd also note that the data, while headed in the right direction, isn't overwhelmingly amazing. So I still do think people are being honest with us. We're only at 45% satisfied.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But we were clear that data would only be shared back in the aggregate.
Okay. And thank you. Hope to see the trend lines keep going in that direction.
Absolutely. So do we. Thank you.
Dr. Sapini?
Thank you. I was wondering if you either did or if we have readily available the data on teacher attendance to correlate with this data from last year and this year for the first two marking periods. Because I think it's very possible to be able to correlate this data with teacher attendance.
I don't have that on me, but I could certainly look at overall attendance rates for the first 90 days.
The first two marking periods.
So 100.
Right. So 90 days?
90 days.
Each 45 days? Is that what you're thinking? Okay.
Interesting. Thank you, Ms. Hidasco.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Ms.
I'm
Cosmo.
sorry.
In addition, if we can also, the exit interview instrument, exit, oh, can you all send that to us? Can we, just the questions that are asked and
We've actually pivoted or are in the process of pivoting. Given our participation in MERC, there's now a exit survey that's being used across the consortium. And so we're working now with the talent office for that to be the survey that will be administered. It will also allow us comparison data. Right now, no survey is administered with enough consistency, so we're using this one moving forward. And that is also an essential action in our CAP that we'll be able to move forward with this spring.
So when will we, you said the spring? I mean,
Yes, I can share the questions with you now, but data, we won't have probably a large wave of resignation until the end of this year, so we'd probably have our first notable wave of data early summer.
All right, okay.
Did you want the questions now, though?
Yes.
Sure.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hidasco.
Thank you.
And we move on to our discussion of the superintendent's budget and our our agenda says priorities 4 and 5, but we didn't really talk about 2 and 3 on Thursday. So it seems to me that if you're prepared to do that, it would make more sense to begin with priority 2. I'm sort of looking around for nods and head shakes. Okay, so let's try that. Who would like to speak to priority 2 first? Okay, all right, sure.
Okay, and you might do this. So, and forgive me if I just can't recall it. So did we decide on an additional day, work session?
We did not.
Okay, that's why I can't recall it. Okay, all right. So, and so at the end of this, are we going to?
We can certainly, and I would suggest that we do it before we get to the end of the meeting.
Okay, right, okay.
Just because by the end of this meeting, we might not be
Exactly.
prepared to think about it.
Because I do think that it would, we have
Yes,
to
well,
make
all we
up-
did was look at this week, and we knew we couldn't do it this week. So start thinking about additional next week.
Yes.
Okay, so priority 2, any thoughts? Mr. Young?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just for the purpose of clarity, I think we arrived at the last meeting consensus relevant to Liz's recommendation, pertinent to, for lack of better description, 3 different buckets.
Yes, and
Is-
we got
Are we
the,
proceeding this evening pursuant to that recommendation? or
well,
just
we
one-
got the Google,
The-
whatever it is called,
Sheet.
came today, and so I'm pretty sure that we haven't filled it in, and nobody's looked at it if we have. So I would say that tonight we'll just sort of be, if there's something you really want to talk about tonight, we'll focus on that, and then we'll start on Thursday drilling down into the Google Doc.
Okay.
That's my feeling, but I'm wide open to other thoughts. Anybody wants to say anything tonight that you really got on your mind, and we need to talk about it, that's fine. So we don't have to go by priority, but it just seems to me like that's the way we started. Let's try to stick to that, okay? So, Mr. Young.
Then, Madam Chair, with that recommendation or instruction, I'll just be really concise and just identify, I know, imagine that, just identify perhaps one objection, and I'll leave the balance to subsequent meetings.
Okay.
Specifically, it pertains to 2.1, and I made the point last meeting, I'll make it again tonight, that we did so much last budget relevant to downtown and our FTEs in the central office and reducing our FTE count in City Hall, that I'm concerned that this budget, if adopted, would reverse that. So I one, just want to convey that objection, but 2, I do have an inquiry, I suppose, relevant to, for example, the new HR persons, or a few new, including recruiters, et cetera. And I know at one point, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had something like 24 people in the HR office. And so my inquiry pertains to what our FTE count is now in HR, or talent acquisition, and if there's an opportunity to instead realign roles in lieu of 2.1, some of these additional positions. So objection and inquiry. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to respond now or collect more priority 2? Okay. We will. Anybody else for priority 2? Ms. Dorr?
Kind of an obvious question, but what is the plan with action 2.3, the custodian salary, bus operator, and bus attendants? It looks like there's a new salary schedule, but then it says $0. and says still determining. So given the number of conversations we've had about bus driver shortage, et cetera, would love to hear a little bit more information there.
All right, anyone else want to, all right, then let's, if it's okay, let's take it, this is just a quick dive into something urgent and I thought you said you wanted to wait.
By priority.
All right, so.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Young, for re-clarifying your objection to the budget. We'll gather the FTE count and show it by org chart. Ms. Dorr, there's $1.5 million for the custodians, $500,000 for bus operators, and $100,000. Do you see that? Yeah.
It now, I just was reading the still determining and then
All good.
moved over.
We are working on determining the precise amount of the raise. These were estimates based on some initial calculations by the talent office. I do know in my last check-in with the talent office, the proposed custodian increase, and we can share more about that perhaps at the next meeting, would make our custodian salaries the highest in the region. I believe this is the same with the bus operators, but need to confirm that as well.
Ms. Cosby?
Okay. Well, I look forward to receiving a little bit more information and what those proposals are. I know that it will be in draft form, but, you know, this is the consideration. That would be good to know what type of percentages we're looking at and the corresponding salaries. And also, I did have a question about now I see in here also the bus operator attendance bonus. Now, that was removed before, wasn't it, during the last budget cycle?
Correct. We did not have it for this current year.
So we're adding it back. Okay.
Well, we never had it. It was discussed as a possibility, but it did not wind up in the final budget last year, and so it is in there now for the coming year.
Okay. And so, Director of Equity. So, explain to me what this position would do within is it something just to make sure that, okay, this is the equity policy, and this, just, what is that position about?
Glad to talk about that, but do we want to do priority 3 next and then priority 4?
Well, that's priority 2, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's listed under there.
2.
The short answer on that is one of our actions in priority 2 is around training adults around implicit bias and the effect that that has on decisions and dispositions, which ultimately affects student learning. It affects issues of equity we talked about earlier this evening. And so that would be the initial focus of that individual's work. It's a very significant and challenging body of work for organization of our size to go through, so we wanted to make sure that it clearly had dedicated capacity. Over time, I think it will expand from there, but that's the initial piece that's called out in the strategic plan. I will also note equity needs to live in every part of the plan, and it is a personal goal of mine that it is infused throughout. So it's why in the budget document we have articulated a set of high priority schools and driving a lot of the new resources towards those schools. I think we can just reflect on the conversation we just had with the advanced placement courses. We want to make sure that Armstrong and Marshall, et cetera, are at the same level as community and Richmond and so on. So that is something which we, and I know you all, want to keep an eye on across all 5 priorities.
Priority 3. Turning pages. Mr. Young. Ms. Burke. Ms. Burke.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Young. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 3 questions. First one is, well, I'm glad to see substitute nurse budget, because currently what usually happens, the principal or the principal's designee has to end up serving as the nurse in the nurse's absence, or we can't get a substitute. So I'm delighted to see that there will be more money placed in that line. My question is action 3.6, school-based celebrations. Is that end of the year or every 9 weeks? So is that ongoing to address attendance, attitude, academic improvement? I'd like to know the time frame there. And my third question is, I have stipends for trauma-informed leader. Can you please expound upon that? Is that per school, or that's one person, or I guess just one person, isn't it? I have a question mark there, so apparently I needed more explanation. Thank you. Mr. Young.
My pleasure. Oh, thank you. I have 2 of them. Madam Chair, my reservation and/or inquiry pertains to 3.3, and specifically, it's the largest sum of money therein, $528,000 year-over-year increase for the 6 behavior specialists. And I understand, as denoted here, it regards the grant. My inquiry regards what evidence, if any, we have relevant to these 6 persons in abating the kind of behavior that that constitutes the impetus for this line item. Thank you.
Ms. Cosby?
My question is not in terms of the impact these individuals. I wish we could add more, and especially in some of our schools with high percentages of disruptive behavior. But my question is this: would like to look at other grants. So this grant is expiring. So would like to look at to see if there are other grant opportunities, and what the specific grant this is, when it can be, can we reapply? I mean, I don't know what grant it is and the terms around the grant. So, and that's just not for this position, but, you know, I think we talked about it before. Dr. Sapini asked the question about grants before. So that's, as we look at this is one example of, are there things that we can cover with grants, or are there going to be other grants that will expire in the very near future that we have to be cognizant of? But I do believe these behavior specialists are needed, and we probably need more.
Thank you. Okay.
Respond.
Ms. Burke? Is that a, no? Okay.
Thank you.
Priority 4?
Should I respond to 3?
All right. Respond to 3.
Sure. For the comments raised by Ms. Burke, the school-based celebrations is at the school's discretion. Those are the funds that I'm checking in with Mr. Hughes that are about to go out, or, yes, okay.
That's correct. Those funds will be allocated to schools. Good evening, all. Those funds will be allocated to schools this week, and the funds will vary depending on the size of the school and title status, free and reduced lunch status.
And
So-
just as a reminder, I'm sorry, Mr. Hughes, for the board, the reason they're going out now is those funds for FY20 were in the batch of funds that the council just approved last week. But they are really to help schools do things to celebrate attendance, grades, citizenship, and it's weighted with an equity lens because we know some schools cannot raise those funds through external sources, typically PTAs, and so we wanted to compensate for that.
I would also like to point out that 20% of those funds are allocated to celebrate our teachers and staff.
And then you asked about the stipends for the trauma-informed leads. Can you speak to that, Mr. Hughes?
Sure. So currently, we are training 22 restorative practice leads and 22 trauma-responsive leads, 44 total, across 22 schools in our division, so about half of our schools. And our vision for these restorative practice leads and trauma-responsive leads is to be able to come in the school and be able to train our staff around either implementing community circles or delivering verbal de-escalation training. It's similar to a train-the-trainer model, but at this point, we need capacity inside the school. So we're looking at non-instructional staff, 44 non-instructional staff members that we can train so that principals don't have to take on this work themselves, and we have so-called experts in the building who can come in, provide coaching, support, expertise. This is a model that we hope to adopt over the next few years so that eventually in every school we have 4 individuals, 2 of which are trained in restorative practices, 2 of which are trained in trauma responsiveness.
And then the last bucket of questions was around the behavior specialists. Any evidence we have in terms of their efficacy, and are there other grants or other sources externally to make up for the deficit created by the expiration of the grant?
Yes, that's a question around data that we may or may not have to support or to see if these folks are effective in their jobs. I will need to collect with Angela Jones, who was our Director of School Climate and Culture and Student Services, to be able to figure out what's the best data to pull to show whether these individuals are effective or not. In terms of other grant opportunities, at this time, I'm not aware of any other grant opportunities, but we need this money because of our expiring CEIS grant. Yes, our expiring CEIS grant, which is a grant that was provided by the state to give us the opportunity to hire these behavior specialists as a way to reduce the percentage of African-American students being referred to special education services.
Coordinated early intervening services.
Yes.
It is not expiring. CEIS is a required set-aside from our IDEA funds based on the disproportionate referral rates of African-American students to who have disabilities, who have IEPs and are suspended. So students with IEPs who are suspended. And so this is meant to provide both early intervention for referrals to receive IEPs as well as suspension or behavioral issues. The reason these are no longer covered by the grant is historically, for some years, RPS had never spent down those dollars, and so we had rollover dollars, so we hired more folks. But it was, the sort of personnel was over budget year over year, and so we have to right-size the budget because we were spending more than the set-aside budget allowed. And so these dollars are primarily dedicated to academic interventions for our academic interventionists, and that's why we need to find a different funding source for our behavior specialists. We believe this will also, that grant has very specific requirements about who they can work with, and we think by funding this locally, we will be able to open up much more flexibility in how
you. I wanted to ask, what is the state of TDTs and our specialists, and also what's the impact of that status with what we're doing right now?
Yes. Right now, I do know that, I do apologize because as I can't talk about the specifics, again, I would be more than happy to set up a call with Angela. But my understanding is that due to some Medicare changes, that we will have less therapeutic day treatment providers in our schools. And that certainly will have an impact on our students who are exhibiting Tier 3 behaviors that are causing danger to themselves and to their peers, which, to Ms. Cosby's point, is even more reason why we need to increase the number of behavior specialists, social workers, counselors, psychologists, and other mental health support staff in our school buildings.
Are we able to help them with those changes?
I would have to sit down with Angela Jones to determine that. I'm not sure yet.
Ms. Cosby?
So these changes with, these Medicaid changes, now when will they go into effect?
Again, I don't have the precise answer, but it's my understanding that they will go into effect this school year, prior to the end of the school year.
Prior to that, okay, all right. So for our next meeting, can we get, I mean, I know you have to confer with Angela, but can we get a report about what we've asked for as we continue to talk about the budget?
Sure, we'll get some information to share with the board on that.
Okay. Ms. Gibson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Overall, I just want to reiterate some of the concerns that I've shared in the last meeting. I'm very thankful to see that we have a big ask, but I'm concerned that there are a lot of things which, from my perspective, seem like nice to haves rather than some have to haves. We had one of our faculty members, a teacher who teaches VPI, and we don't have gym teachers. We don't have music teachers, and yet, we've got a coordinator to manage out-of-school time partnerships, and this person's, including benefit, that's $112,000. So something seems off. For me, this is National School Counselor Week. We need more school counselors. We need more school psychologists. There are some really fundamental needs that are missing, and I'm concerned that the budget at this stage really misses the mark. Some of the things I really encourage us to go back and look at are things like a lot of these travel expenses, a lot of the celebration expenses. I really think that there is an opportunity to reallocate that towards some other more essential needs. And I also want to reiterate the need for more details. And I think that's been an ongoing, reoccurring theme throughout the meeting, including in prior meetings. I am a person who has no shame to say that our schools are funded and that our schools are adequately funded and that we get the resources that we need. But I don't feel like I'm doing my job as representing the folks who elected me unless I demand to get more detail, which is a plan. So all of the line items that are not nouns, and this is something I said last year too. So we kind of described a program, but there's no detail in terms of what's in that program. Are there staff members? What are the specific expenses? That's the detail that I think is really critical to include, not just to ensure that that we are including everything, so we can ensure that these numbers are indeed accurate, which is important, but it's also necessary so that we can effectively advocate for these funds. And so at this stage, it really feels like in many areas, we're essentially asking for a blank check. And so my ask is, this is now the third time that we've looked at this same budget, and my ask is, when are we going to get that additional detail? I'd encourage us to look at the budget documents that have been prepared by Chesterfield, by other surrounding counties. There is a little bit more meat on the bone, and this is really a basic ask that I think is really critical at this stage.
Ms. Gibson, we have looked at what has been proposed so far in Chesterfield and Henrico and Hanover, and it is actually less detailed, what they've been presented so far. And we can share that with you if necessary. But I'm not saying that we can't or whatever. We all recognize that's a concern of yours. But I do think it's fair to our people to say they worked very hard on this budget and they've spent a lot of time on it. And while it seems like a need that some have for even more, for some of us, this is a really good place to look and say, this is too much here, this is not enough here. And then when we get down to it, so we'd be happy to share with anyone who would like to see what the proposed budget things were from the superintendents at those 3 districts. Okay, Ms. Cosby?
Thank you. No. So when we, I just want to go back to the information we asked for the next meeting as we discuss the behavior specialist and the counselors. Wait, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. So 3.3, the 3 additional counselors, 1 at each Armstrong, Huguenot, and With. In this, with the additional documentation, can you let us know, it brings it up to the total amount. So if we add 1, so each school, do they have 3 counselors? Do they have, 4? And then with the 1 additional, it will bring it up to what would be the total count. But also just discipline data, that will help tremendously, and not just discipline data, especially as we think about behavior specialists. So it's the discipline data, but also what is happening in highlight certain things in the community. So we know we've just had a very sorrowful incident that happened where we have a 3-year-old that was killed, whose siblings go to our schools. So what will so we have to look at it in its totality. And as we talk about these behavior specialists and counselors and things like that, I agree with my colleague, Ms. Gibson. These are critical things that, in my opinion, we do have to address and make sure that we're adequately funding.
Thank you.
All right. Priority 4. This is our deep partnership with families and community. Mr. Young?
I'll save you the speech. 4.8, actually Kenya just spoke to it a moment ago, specifically the $112,000 for a new staff person in City Hall.
Would you like to respond to this? Are there any others for priority 4?
I would ask then Dr. Harris to come up and speak to that coordinator for out-of-school time and its role and its necessity. Or Dr. Rett. Or both of you.
So as you know, we have a partnership with the city and many of the city's providers to effectively take advantage of having out-of-school opportunities in all 44 of our schools. That requires a significant level of coordination to make sure that those programs are high quality and that they're aligned with our organizational strategy and priorities. It's not that while those programs operate largely on their own day-to-day, there still is a lot of coordination around data, around communication to families and schools, around alignment, again, to our academics and our student needs. So this OST coordinator would be that point person to make sure that there's one sort of flow through for all of these different programs to come. What else would you add?
I would just add that the biggest, I would say, complaint that we get from our out-of-school time providers, and are not complaint, but pain point, is around data entry and partnership agreements, so they can make sure the quality of programs are actually supporting student learning needs, which is just impossible to do without the data. And right now, there's a significant capacity gap on our end to make sure that we're able to work in alignment with our out-of-school partnerships, especially as we try to focus them more to aligned around our strategic plan and academic needs.
I'll just say one more piece. In the past, Richmond has been the beneficiary of several 21st century learning grants from the Federal Department of Education. And while we still have one site where that's occurring, in the past, those have not been well managed, and we've had corrective actions for those prior to our time, and so that really has put us at risk for future large amounts of funding. And so by dedicating a owner here, I do believe we can pursue also much more significant grants to fund extended day, extended week, and really have some quality control beyond our partners, but also any large 21st century grants that we want to apply for. This will help us make that reinvestment.
Ms.
I have a
Cosby.
question. So you mentioned data, and so with our out-of-school time partnership with the city and our initiative, so are we looking at, with out-of-school time, what is it, the ABCs, the attendance, behavior, what is it, classroom performance? I can't remember the C, but so are we, or do we have a system in place, whereas we have identified every student, every RPS student that is participating in one of these after-school programs, and looking at tracking the attendance and the behavior and all that stuff? And if we don't have it, are we putting that in place? And if we are putting it in place, when are we going to, when will we implement it? Or is it dependent upon this particular position?
I think this position is going to help with that. Right now, I would say our 7 major out-of-school time programming, Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA, Higher Achievement, they have identified who are the students in those programs. I think the gap is making sure they have the data so they can drill down and do exactly what you said. We imagine this position helping with that. Right now, we are still trying to do that based on capacity on Tracy's team. We have not successfully done that with all of our partners, but this would really allow a more, I think what you're speaking to, a systemic approach to make sure that's automatic. So as soon as someone signs a MOU, we know what the data sharing agreement is, and we can just automatically share that data and then update the board regularly on how that is going.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Do I have anyone who has something they would like to bring up about priority 5 proposed expenditures? Mr. Young?
Too many herein to cite them all, but there are a whole lot of new positions here. Most frequently, the year-over-year dollar increase pertains to $96,000. My colleagues, presumably folks in the audience, have this in front of them, so I'm not going to reference all of them, but that pertains to my principal objection here in priority 5. Thank you.
Mr. Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm curious to know, about the contract for the data dashboard and how we came up with the figure and what that process will look like. And then I know that we've got this matter of the equity fund to assist high priority schools, and I'm curious to know how we will go about prioritizing schools within that high priority status. And I believe when the statement of needs or the budget was first proposed to us, we heard that there was going to be some discussion around that, but I'm curious to know whether the administration will be providing a more detailed look at how those dollars will be allocated.
Ms. Gibson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to reiterate Mr. Barlow's point about the equity fund, and that's a good example. You know, is there going to be additional staff resources that are provided to the schools in the equity fund? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this whole budget should be an equity fund. So, you know, so I think it's important to get that detail. Another line item that I was curious about is the HR budget system. If I recall, in the original budget that we got with the 5-year plan, the second phase of implementing the HR budget system was estimated to be $65,000, and so now the estimation is at $500,000, and so just wanted to get clarity on the change in that. And then a couple other smaller things are, like there's $50,000 for rebranded materials. You know, I guess I'd like to talk more about what drove the need for rebranding. Of course, you know, I work in marketing, so that's a topic near and dear to me. There was a $10,000 for budget communication, so I just like a little bit more detail on that. $15,000 for communicating the new zones, and as far as I know, the communication plan right now includes, you know, kind of that social media outreach and some community meetings, so just wanted to get more detail on that. And certainly the rezoning implementation plan, that $100,000, you know, what is the breakdown in terms of the after-school program versus transportation? Does it require that we hire another bus driver? You know, how many buses do we need for that? What are we estimating in terms of the number of students? What are we estimating in terms of the after-school costs? That type of, and is there going to be transportation? You know, so I just would like to, again, flesh that out a bit more. Thank you.
Ms. Dorr?
I know that the costs related to the rezoning implementation are, it's called out the Carver bus subsidizing aftercare, yeah. So I would echo Ms. Gibson, just some additional details there. One thing that's come up is the Carey after-school program as provided by Parks and Recreation is significantly less expensive than the after-school program at Fox provided by the YMCA. So that's just one small example, but I'm sure there are other examples in other districts that I would love for us to be mindful of. And then I appreciate the nod to maintaining the sustainability position that was previously funded by a grant, but I wonder if, one, we should see if we could continue to have that position provided by a grant, or two, you know, I think that unless we have energy savings, that position can justify the new position. I think the money is probably, as much of a green environmentalist as I am, I think we just need to be mindful of positions that grants create and then that we're left shouldering the burden for unless there's a clear plan for them.
I'm sorry, Ms. Dorr, could you say again which 5 point whatever that was?
5.8, coordinator sustainability.
Thank you very much. Okay. Ms. Page?
Yes. My question is to action 5.5, the additional buses. I would like to know the impact or the additional routes that would create with the purchase of new buses. Because I think I stated that very clearly. Transportation is a huge equity issue, and we have to address it.
Anyone else with a priority 5? Ms. Cosby, is your hand up?
I was thinking. And we started to address this during our last meeting. It was an example of, I'd thrown this out as an example of, I didn't quite get in terms of the salary adjustments for staff. So if we can continue that explanation for 5.3. And also, I'm going back to Ms. Doerr's comment about the sustainability of positions, et cetera, and it just brought to mind. Can we also get a report with what the foundation covers? So we have the foundation. Are there, what specifically, it's just an updated report, that's all.
Ms. Gibson?
One other thing, question I had in looking at the original plan, I think that there was a line item for a student information system, and so was also curious if that is, we're thinking about doing that later, or what the plan is with that.
No further mentions, then we will ask Mr. Camrus to respond.
Thank you all very much. I think I can handle most of these, but I might need Mr. Simmons for a few. On the data dashboard, the RFP has gone out. We're in the process. No. Well, why don't you come up and share that? Because apparently I'm misinformed. All right, Darren.
What was the?
Data dashboard.
How do we come to the price? So
Yes.
we talked to a few different vendors that provide data dashboard services. Just at a very base general level, they cost about $5 to $6 per student. So that's how we came to the placeholder for that budget item.
Just a quick follow-up, Madam Chair.
Mr. Barlow?
Thank you. So you've mentioned that we've spoken with them. Have we begun an RFP or contracting process?
Not yet, no.
My apologies. On the equity fund, I would agree with Ms. Gibson that the whole budget should be an equity fund. We've worked very hard to do exactly that by trying to prioritize as much as we can for the schools that need the most, but we will obviously continue to do everything we can on that front. The current equity funds are being spent by schools. We do want to leave a fair amount of discretion for schools to perhaps paraphrase Mr. Young, to let our leaders make the best decisions that they need for their campuses. As for how we would prioritize the schools within the high priority, yes, that is a conversation that we would need to continue to have. I don't know that it has to happen right now in the budget season. If the board would like to do that, certainly we can do so. Most likely it would be those who are in greatest need, so the ones closer to the top of that list. As for the HR system, I'll throw that to you, Mr. Simmons. Why the change in expected price?
Yeah. I'm worried about the ERP implementation, and it's just because I've done these in the past. I know how hard they can be. I know just the amount of change management, project management, workflow redesign that goes into these. And then just doing the initial change readiness assessment, it doesn't feel like RPS is there just yet. Also, we've had more conversations with vendors throughout the year, just getting a sense of how they price. Some price based upon number of students, some price based upon the modules you're going to go for. We're only going to touch the core modules, nothing extra. Some price, there's different factors, but I think that the implementation piece, especially around the first year, is going to be quite large. With all the training pieces that's going to go into this, all the workflow redesign, as I mentioned, and just making sure that this comes off really well. If you Google ERP implementation in school district, you'll find there's dozens of like horror stories out there about these going wrong. And I just don't want to be in that boat. So I wanted to put a figure out there that we could make. I wanted to put a figure out there that could help us to get the work done and do a great job of implementing in year one.
Moving on to the rebranded materials Ms. Gibson had raised, I think there's a missing parentheses in that line item. That's for the new schools. So, you know, t-shirts for the kids and floor mats, things that are not covered by the capital budget. So certainly if the board feels that's a necessary expense, glad to revisit that. On the rezoning implementation, yes, we can do a little bit more detail on that. Ms. Dorr raised the after-school issue with Carey and Fox, which is why it's called out there. I will say some of this is being surfaced as we go through the process of implementing rezoning, so we also wanted to keep just a little bit of cushion for these things as they come up, but we'll try to flesh that out a little bit more. Mr. Simmons, you can speak to the sustainability position better than I, so if you want to share what that role does and if you feel it is truly essential or not and what return we're getting for it. So.
Yeah, so when I propose each new position, I really looked at what is the function, what's the benefit that this is going to provide to RPS, and is there currently somebody in RPS with this, performing in this capacity? Is it in their job description? This is one of the gap areas where there's nobody after this position goes away who will be doing this work. So this is the solar. We can do a lot more in terms of recycling in our schools. We talked about stormwater last time, so managing those credits, getting those projects off the ground, planting trees, just being greener, period. So that's the goal behind this position.
Thank you. And can you talk about the impact of the new buses and what effect they will have and why they're necessary?
Yes. So why 10 buses? Floyd and I looked at data today just about our crashes and our accidents. We've had 50 buses break down, 50 breakdowns this year alone since the first day of school. The average age of our buses still hovers around 13 years. We need to get it down to about 10. We have a bus on the road right now with 300,000 miles on it. So that's why we want to get 10 new buses. And 4 of those will hopefully be, or will be, the electric buses that we've discussed.
Would it be fair to say the question was raised, how many new routes will come online because of the buses? And it's more that we will have fewer breakdowns and lengthy times and probably not lots of more routes.
So fewer breakdowns, fewer dollars going to maintenance of old buses, and getting kids to school on time. Yes.
And ask for a report from the Education Foundation. We can certainly set that up for the board. And then the student information system, can you speak to that?
Yeah, Aspen's actually a fairly modern system, and a lot of school districts use Aspen. I don't think that we want to take on an ERP implementation and a SIS implementation at the same time. I think we need to further customize the SIS, but I don't think we need to go into just restart and start from zero here.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, our proposed additional basic needs and adjustments, and I know some of these came from board suggestions. And there's a lot here. I mean, some of it we already had talked about, the Appomattox Regional Governor's School salary increase. You know, I mean, some of these things just, you know, we didn't really have a lot of control over that. So some things were not budgeted before, but if we're going to pay for them, they should be in the budget. So if you'll take a look at all this, and maybe, I know there's at least one that I know people want to talk about. I don't know if you want to talk about them tonight. I'm looking for hands. We're on page 42 and 43. Going one. Okay, we will talk about those at our budget work session. Is there anything that anybody would like to talk about the budget before we move on? I will say that maybe now's when we need to talk about setting up another meeting. Ms. Page, then Ms. Cosby.
I just want to, excuse me, I just want to, for the record, as we talk about increasing the seats for Maggie Walker and Appomattox Regional Governor's School, that we look at the breakdown of the students that have been accepted, the schools that they are coming from, you know, the racial breakdown. Because if we're talking about increasing seats and it's not equitable, then that's a problem.
I do want to note, Ms. Page, we are not actually increasing any seats at Maggie Walker or Appomattox. We're just reflecting the increase in tuition costs next year. The only regional school that we're adding seats is to Code RVA for the incoming freshman class.
But I still would like to see a breakdown of the students that are attending those regional schools, to make sure that, you know, we're being good stewards about funding for our students.
Okay, Ms. Cosby?
I just want to make sure, and I'm sure I'll put it in that Google Doc. However, I do want to, for our next meeting, we have, and we've talked about this our last meeting, the salary increase for teachers, but I would like to see 3 tiers. So what we have, the 3%, 4%, and 5%, what that would look like, just because I am extremely concerned. I know that Chesterfield is looking at another salary model, and I want to make sure that we remain competitive.
Yes, we can certainly model that. I do want to note what Chesterfield has proposed is what RPS started 2 years ago, which is the decompression. So they're a little bit behind, frankly, where Richmond is, but we can certainly give you the estimates for 4% and the 5%.
Mr. Young?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We discussed at our last meeting, it was late, but, and I suspect we'll discuss it again, on page 44, the proposed $631,000 for stormwater fees. So look forward to perhaps Thursday evening, perhaps tomorrow evening at the compact meeting, discuss this. It's on my agenda, hope it's on the mayor's. And then maybe Thursday night too.
Okay. All right, anyone else? Then Mr. Barlow.
Thank you. I just wanted to sign on to what Ms. Cosby said related to teacher salaries and staff salaries.
Okay. All right, and looking at calendars, we have a scheduled meeting next Tuesday. Ms. Page?
Quick question. The career and technical education, where it says additional CTE supplies and offerings, does that Carl Perkins grant, does that play into support of that?
Can we update the board on that at our next work session, get more detail for you on that? Okay.
Okay. So, we have a budget work session scheduled next Thursday night. That is the only one we have scheduled next week. The following week, we have on the 18th, am I correct on this? You all can hit me if I'm wrong. We have our school board meeting at which we want to adopt our budget. Approve a budget, yes, approve the budget. So, the 17th is a holiday. That's why we're meeting, for our meeting on the 18th. So next week, we have nothing on, we as a board have nothing scheduled on the 10th or the 12th or the 13th. And of course, nothing on Friday on Valentine's Day. But I don't know if anybody feels that any of those 10th, 12th, 13th would be an additional 2-hour discussion. I'm pretty sure there's nothing else that we're already scheduled for next week besides our one budget hearing. Anybody? Ms. Gibson?
There's a Binford Dance Company performance on Thursday, so my preference would be for it to be on either one of the other days.
Okay. Anybody feel strongly about the 10th or the 12th? Are you looking at your calendar too, Mr. Camrus?
I will make whatever date available.
Mr. Young?
I was prepared to propose that the VPC meet on the 12th, but needless to say, this obviously
Yeah, I think this is
priority. But in full disclosure, just wanted to share.
Okay. Mr. Barlow?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to say the 10th because I don't know what to do with myself on a Monday without a board meeting anyway.
I did not hear a word of that.
The 10th. He said a whole bunch of stuff, but basically it was the 10th.
He wants the 10th, not he's opposed to the 10th. So we would meet Monday and Tuesday. Does that work for everybody? Monday and Tuesday? We're voting on the 18th, so this would be, we already are scheduled on the 11th at 6, and on the 18th is our regular meeting. So if the 10th works for everybody, we will have a budget work session also on Monday the 10th. That gives you time to publish and let everybody know. And I assume we'll do it at the school board back at City Hall. All right, here we go. Okay. So we are now moving to, since we are not doing 7.02, we are moving to board action items. Now, 8.01, receive for a 4.3 and action policy 7.3-11, use of computer technology, and 8.3-2, acceptable computer system use. And so for any of these action items, of course, we will need a motion to approve and a second.
So moved.
All right, Ms. Page has moved this. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Dorr. So it has been moved and seconded that we approve the revised policy 7.3-11 and 8.3-2. Is there any discussion? All right, then we'll have a vote. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Page? To approve.
Oh. Yes.
Ms. Cosby?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Young?
Aye.
Dr. Sapini?
Yes.
Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Ms. Gibson?
Yes.
Ms. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Owen?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay. Next is receive for a second read and action, proposed revisions to policy 1-6.3, quorum and rules of order.
So moved.
Who was that?
Liz.
Okay, Ms. Dorr. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Barlow. Is there any discussion? Okay, let's have our vote. I love this.
Ms. Gibson?
Yes.
Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Dr. Sapini?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Ms. Cosby?
Yes.
Ms. Page?
Yes.
Ms. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Owen?
Yes. All right. Moving on to 8.03, receive for a second read in action the high school program of studies for next year, 2020 to 2021. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Burke has seconded. Is there discussion? Okay, let's move to the vote.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Ms. Cosby?
Yes.
Ms. Page?
Yes.
Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Dr. Sapini?
Yes.
Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Ms. Gibson?
Abstain.
Ms. Burke?
Yes.
And Ms. Owen?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
All right. 8.05, receive for action the personnel actions.
You see, okay.
Oh, I did. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I skipped one, Ms. Udesco. Receive for a second read and action policy 5.4.4, alternative paths to attaining standard units of credit. Is there a motion?
Sure.
Need a motion on 8.04, policy 5.4.4, alternative paths to attaining standard units of credit.
So moved.
Is there a second? People.
Second.
Thank you. Is there discussion? Okay, Ms. Gibson, then Ms. Dorr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have concerns with this policy item. You know, we spoke a lot about that it was an equity issue to ensure that our students are getting the full 140-hour clock requirement. And you know, those students that are pursuing these alternative paths are our most vulnerable students. They are, you know, using a computer program to meet the requirements. And, you know, I just, in my heart, don't think that, you know, we are serving those students the best that we can by making, by you know, reducing the requirement. So that is why I will not vote in support of this policy.
Ms. Dorr and then Mr. Barlow.
I'm going to vote in support of it, but I do share some of the concerns that Ms. Gibson highlighted. The reason why I'm going to vote in support of it, though, is because there's been a number of different cases this year where students have gone to JSARG and then come back and had an awkward slightly less than the allotted classroom time, where they've just had to sit in an auditorium, and they could have been pursuing interests online, and I think that this policy solves that. I think it is. Isn't that related? Yeah. So the question was, Ms. Gibson said that it was not related to that, and maybe if the administration could clarify, because I thought it was in direct relation to that.
Good evening again. This policy is designed to cover a whole host of scenarios, ranging from students like you've mentioned, as well as, and certainly students who may be doing credit recovery, but also students for whom who are accelerated, and the idea that clock hours equals mastery. I do believe that this policy actually puts us in a position, as we reimagine our school day, the idea that you can only learn after 140 clock hours. We know that there are some students who come in bored from day one because they are above where the class is. So this is a mastery-based policy, not a time-based policy. There is a reason the state allows not just virtual courses, but requires a virtual course as part of graduation requirement. Doing online classes actually, in fact, are sometimes more rigorous and require more work, but those aren't measured by seat hours, and I can think those of us who've taken a grad class can attest to that. So I do not believe that this is a lowering of the bar. In fact, I would object to any policy that does that. Our surrounding counties have a similar policy, because this allows us flexibility to meet students where they are, whether they are accelerated or whether they need a different kind of structure. For example, as we look to evening classes for students who have to work during the day, and students who do have a lot of life experience and skill, they do not need to sit in a class for 140 hours if they're able to demonstrate mastery of the content. That's just a sampling of, I think, some of the primary things that we're trying to solve for our students.
Thank you. And Mr. Barlow.
Dr. Rapp. Thank you. So do you think there should be a reasonable limitation on the number of these courses that a student can take? And if so, do you have a thought about what that would look like?
We discussed that, and not having any sort of basis for that decision, I did not include a limitation. As you may know, Richmond is the host district to the Virginia Virtual Academy, where students take every class online. And so I would certainly be open to some limitations, but not having any particular criteria, it would feel somewhat arbitrary to me, which is why I ultimately did not include that, but certainly would consider that if the board felt strongly.
Any further discussion?
I'm curious to know whether any of my colleagues feel strongly about whether there should be limitations on this. And I also don't want to just prescribe some arbitrary limitation, so I'd be curious to at least get some more insight in that respect from the administration before moving forward with the vote. Nonetheless, I'd like to hear from my colleagues.
I support that. I think it kind of gets to what Ms. Gibson's concerns are and that are shared, that, you know, if we can have some additional language to make sure it's not going to be something that can be used so that, you know, if students don't meet the 140 and as a get around, I guess, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Dr. Epp, is there any, I'm sorry, may I? Is there any time sensitivity on this?
I do feel time sensitivity on this for a couple of reasons. We certainly could bring it back the following board meeting, though. The time sensitivity, I feel, is as we look to launch various solutions for students in terms of these, as we look at, we're designing our pilot around the Newcomer Academy, around our Dropout Recovery Academy, and those things. I do want this policy on the books before we begin any of those courses or opportunities to award credit. And our Student Success Center that has launched, these are students who are coming back for credit recovery to earn their diploma. I will also, in terms of the limit, what I do want to do is ensure that we are not, by adopting this policy, somehow undermining the work of the PLC, which is currently run by Communities in Schools, because students there, they come in at all different periods in their high school career, and I would be hesitant to put a number that then undermines or somehow negates that program. So that would just be one caution. And in terms of your concern, Ms. Cosby, I certainly feel, would not want to put forth a policy that is in any way intended to be a workaround. But the way I think we've mitigated that thus far is by a couple of ways. One, that these are not just any online courses, that these are state-approved providers with state-approved courses. That two, these are courses that have also been vetted to be included in our program of studies. So it's not just any course by any Virginia provider. And then third, it has to be a mastery-based course. Because the truth is, we do not currently, as a school division, have the capacity or bandwidth to evaluate mastery on an individual level, which is why we've limited the scope of this to a course that is evaluated based on mastery of the standards. Otherwise, I wouldn't bring this proposal forward because I do not feel confident that right now, at this point in time, we have the ability to do that. There are other school divisions that go broader beyond virtual courses, for example, independent study. So outside of the online limitation or the mastery-based limitation, this opens the door for the future for independent study, for students to apply for that, or other ways to demonstrate their mastery of the coursework. But I could certainly look into additional language if that's so desired.
Ms. Page?
So I guess my question, so this policy has been properly vetted, Virginia Department of Education, and you say you looked at language from our surrounding localities or?
Correct. And
other districts?
Correct. I've worked with Ms. Lilly. We looked at Fairfax County as an exemplar, which was suggested to us from the VDOE some time ago. We looked at neighboring divisions. So this is, I think, a fairly consistent policy model, but I would defer to Ms. Lilly to add anything else she sees as important.
Ms. Dorr?
Yeah, I was going to ask a couple of those follow-up questions. I got sidetracked because I wanted clarification, but is there another, like, I was under when I read waiver, I thought there was some sort of application process that happens to, okay, so that was my question was, is there a way to have a check on this in some regard so that we don't have any unintended consequences? It seems like maybe there's desire from around the table to potentially rework this, and I would support that. I do think it's a step in the right direction, and I appreciate the work around it, but I do hear what some of my other colleagues have said about some of the unintended consequences that we might enact if we approve it tonight. I don't know how Ms. Page feels.
Okay, let's have a vote.
Are we gonna, yeah.
We can't, I mean, the motion is, as stated, there's not a way to, you can withdraw the motion.
So I've heard the concerns. Yes, I will withdraw the motion. And then we come back the next meeting with additional information.
Are you all right with that, Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Mr. Barlow?
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to make sure that we're providing helpful feedback about what we're actually looking for to the administration, so we don't see something that comes back next time that doesn't necessarily align with expectations. I think we've learned that lesson of late. So I'm curious to know if, Dr. Epp, you think there's any guidance that we can provide, or if you feel comfortable with devising a solution based on sort of the scattered feedback we've provided here.
If I may summarize what I'm hearing as feedback, to provide language that addresses that mitigates the unintended consequence of the abuse of this policy, or as a workaround from from students demonstrating mastery of the course. I don't want to say workaround of the 140 hours, because the whole nature of this is to waive the 140-hour requirement, which is based on something, but is potentially not equivalent to what every student needs to learn the material. So we would include language that tightens up or provides some kind of check and balance on that. That's the primary piece I've heard. On the number or the limitation, I'm hesitant to do that at this point, but if that's what will allow this to be adopted, I certainly would research what seems reasonable, or potentially an exception for certain credit recovery programs that I would probably adjust the language. So that's how I'm interpreting your feedback and processing it in real time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
It's fine. I'm tough to see over here sometimes. Just wanted to note that I think Dr. Epp is spot on with addressing the intent as opposed to some prescriptive hour limit if we don't have one, so thank you.
All right. Moving on then to 8.05, receiving for action the personnel actions. Let's see, Desco. Did I get those?
Good evening again. Before you have the nomination of 11 employees, the change of contract of 6 employees, the transfer of 2 employees, the resignation of 11 employees, the furlough of 11 employees, the return from leave of 7 employees, the non-renewal of 1 employee, and the termination of 2 employees.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Ms. Dora and Ms. Burke. Are there any questions for open, or any need to?
I have a question. Transfers. Is there a certain time of the school year that individuals can transfer from one school to another?
Transfers do not typically happen within the year, except due to extenuating or extreme circumstance. I can look into those. Otherwise, we have a transfer fair with the goal of transfers happening at the year mark to limit disruption for students. So I don't know the details of these 2, but I can look into why.
Okay, please, and the transfer fair takes place?
The first one is tentatively planned for March, late March for this year.
Thank you.
Ms. Page? Approval.
Yes.
Ms. Cosby?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Dr. Sapini?
Abstain.
Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Ms. Gibson?
Abstain.
Ms. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Owen?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
8.06, 8.06.
Yes, I'm trying to see. We have one request for board travel, and Ms. Burke is requesting to attend the VSBA Southside Regional Conference. The estimated cost is $59.96.
So moved.
Mr. Barlow moved.
Second.
Ms. Page seconded. Is there any discussion? Let's vote.
Ms. Page?
Yes.
Ms. Cosby?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Abstain.
Dr. Sapini? Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Ms. Gibson?
Yes.
Ms. Burke?
Yes.
And Ms. Owen?
Yes. All right. Then we have 8.07, the resolution for action on disposition of Moore Street. And I guess we need a motion.
I move that we adopt the resolution as presented.
Second.
Is there discussion? Mr. Young and then Ms. Page.
Madam Chair, this year we'll spend nearly $700,000 in utilities and properties that are either vacant or largely vacant. I should note that this is not one of them. We're not spending utilities dollars on this facility, but we are spending significant sums of money on other properties in our portfolio. And our neighbors and taxpayers expect more of us to prioritize scarce resources for the purpose of classrooms where we do have students in them. So I look forward to 2020, look forward to us unloading or disposing of a lot of properties to, one, reduce those kind of expenditures I just referenced, but two, to generate capital that we can put right back into our school buildings for the purpose of renovation, rehabilitation, and/or new construction. So I'm grateful to my colleagues on the Vacant Property Committee and look forward to very busy 2020 pertinent to unloading some of these properties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Page, then Mr. Barlow.
Just want to say, I appreciate the resolution for the, quitclaim deed, but more importantly, the good faith gesture where it states the property will be repurposed in a manner to benefit Richmond children. And I probably will add Richmond Public Schools students, because so often, and we know some of the buildings that have been surplus, quitclaim deed, and sold at a value that the school system did not reap the benefits. So I appreciate that language, but I would suggest Richmond Public Schools children.
Well,
I can address that.
if we do. It would have to be amended, and I've asked the attorney if.
There's a motion on the floor.
Right.
If there's a motion.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and former Madam Chair. I think an important distinction here, there has been discussion of a potential use of this property. As you're likely aware, a big portion of that potential use for the property would be for students who are not yet RPS students, because it would be students who are coming into RPS eventually through a daycare, child development center. So the language there is really intended to make sure it incorporates Richmond children. Ideally, of course, I'd like to see something along the lines of recognizing that we don't have the ability to, legally prescribe these things. I'd really like to see something along the lines of what we've seen in discussions with community partners to include free seats for a substantial number of Richmond students who may be able to attend the center, but recognizing the difficulty of getting such commitments through the city, other parties, and ourselves, and also the legal intricacies of the approval. There, that's a challenge.
Ms. Page?
So, I mean, I'm good with the language. Just want to, for the record, it's a good faith gesture. Okay.
And then just to speak a little bit more to the substance, if you don't mind, Madam Chair.
Yeah, you were next. Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I do, and this, I was sort of alluding to this a moment ago, but I do have high hopes for this facility. And it's challenging and frustrating sometimes as a school board member because we'd like to exercise more control over what the ultimate disposition of these properties are. And I know that we will continue to explore ways to ensure that we have an impact and that these schools are, or that the disposition of any property is benefiting RPS and the children of our school system and of our city. But I am optimistic about the likelihood of a potential partnership that could really benefit a lot of students in that area. I'm hopeful that this will lead to a partnership that will improve resources for Carver Elementary in particular. And I am also excited about the opportunity for children of varying backgrounds to get to learn and play with one another from a young age. And hopefully we'll see strong, diverse relationships arising out of a potential use for this building. But I would like to thank the administration for work that was put into these discussions, and hopefully thank my colleagues for passing this resolution.
Ms. Gibson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, I'm not able to support the resolution, and I appreciate the interest. The concerns that I have, I think about the West Hampton School and, the expectation that this property would be, it's a very valuable property, and ultimately the schools saw no benefit financially because it was rented. I think that this resolution really misses any specifics in terms of the cost or the sale, how it will be valued. I think, unfortunately, there's not quite enough detail in terms of how it needs to benefit Richmond's children. I think that is, unfortunately, a very, very broad statement. And I think that, in order to protect our current students who are in school at Carver, we really would be well served to consider other requirements, including the process of renovating the building to ensure that it doesn't disrupt this current school day, to consider parking and the operational needs, the current needs of the building, to ensure that when the building is repurposed, that there's not a conflict in terms of the dual uses of that shared space. Ultimately, I also wish we had more time. I mean, I, in general, think that, we just received this at this meeting, and I think that I have anxiety that we haven't allowed sufficient time for public input on this. So that is the rationale for my vote this evening.
Okay. Let's go for the vote.
Ms. Page, the vote?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Dr. Sapini?
Yes.
Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Ms. Gibson?
No.
Ms. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Owen?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Moving to board business, 9.01, receive for information and update from the Navy Hill Development Advisory Commission. Madam Clerk, you have a speaker?
I don't know who they are. Ms. Gibson? They did respond that they would be present.
Is there someone here from the Navy Hill Development Advisory Commission? Aha.
He's a parent. Remember he spoke earlier?
I know, he was going to call somebody in. You're up.
Chair, members, my name is Pierce Homer. I'm the chair of the now completed Navy Hill Development Advisory Commission. This is John Gerner, was the vice chair. We were a 9-member body appointed by City Council to look at and to significantly investigate the Navy Hill proposal. We made a number of findings to City Council after about a dozen meetings, at which there was public participation at every single meeting, including 4 public hearings. We created our own financial model that was authored by Mr. Gerner. I developed a risk matrix. Both of us are professionals in this field and have been affiliated with a number of large projects, some of them involving educational facilities, some entertainment, some infrastructure, et cetera. The composition of the commission was dictated by the council ordinance. It was not by district. It was to ensure that people had backgrounds in finance, in infrastructure, in construction, legal, et cetera. It was a very complex proposal, and Navy Hill proposes actually about a dozen different elements to it. The findings that we made, and we've got I know you've had a long day, so we'll try and be brief here. The findings that the commission made were very significant and clear. We determined that there were elements of the project that were very beneficial, the mixed use component, for example. The use of surplus city property to obtain growth in the downtown in a way that is perhaps compatible with the rest of downtown. In particular, to support the growth of the tourism industry at the convention center. So those were positive findings, and there were about 5 of those. There were about a dozen findings where we said, we just don't have enough information. And then there were 4 findings where we said, these argue for not moving the project ahead. And we combined those, and I'm going to talk about those 4 findings in a minute. But we put those into a red light, stop, yellow light, pause, green, go ahead. And the yellow lights predominated. There's just a very large number of unknowns. In fact, John and I were out there listening to City Council debate this very project, and they're trying to figure out, well, are we talking about the original 80-block tax increment district? Are we talking about state sales tax? There's a lot of moving parts on a project that is still evolving. And so some of the comments and questions we may get tonight, we may have to say, well, we're basing it on this particular version of events because it is a moving target. But for this body, I think the 4 findings that were red lights are probably the most significant. The first finding was that the project did put at risk city funds and the city capital program. The second finding was that the project did put at risk school educational funding. The third finding was that the city had not properly resourced nor have the administrative infrastructure to manage a $1.5 billion project. And I'll say, this is what I do. I've done large projects all over Virginia, all over the US. You can't do that on less than $100,000 a year, which is what they had set aside for project administration. The final finding was that the $300 million tax-financed arena was not a sound or prudent financial investment. And remember, it is 100% tax-funded, the arena there. And so in view of competing capital priorities, probably foremost of which are the school reconstruction and maintenance, that was a significant and controversial finding of the commission. Now, with respect to the education funding, because I know that's your concern, we felt it was important to identify a couple of issues and how tax increment financing can affect this body, and not just on this project going forward. You've adopted a resolution in recognition of that, but we have some real-world experience here. So there are a couple of different ways that school education funding would have been or might be affected by this project. Who knows where they're going to wind up? They're probably voting as we speak. The first are additional students. And so the Davenport analysis indicated that they anticipated about 300 additional students. Given the makeup there, that's probably elementary and middle school students. That's a big number that changes things, has cost and capital components. Interestingly, the study that was just released today by the secondary consultant said there were 0 student impacts. So we don't believe that there is a number there, and I think the 300, that was our working assumption. So that's an impact on the school division. The second impact, and this is germane to all tax increment financing, is you need a little bit more money every year just to keep doing what you are doing today, right? When you do tax increment financing, you freeze the tax base, and you lose the ability over your downtown taxable base to simply keep up with inflation. That's a very significant issue here, and given an 80-block TIF, the tax increment district that covered downtown, very significant. The third impact is on the state education formula, the composite index. I dealt for 15 years with composite index issues when I worked in Prince William County. And one of the things that happens, and you saw this a lot in the 80s and early 90s when there were energy facilities that would come online, like the peaking facility up in Hanover County, and you get a spike in your assessed value, it changes your composite index and you actually lose money. That is a documented feature of not only Virginia, but a number of state educational systems. And so you need to take that into account as you have these large projects that spike assessed value or sales tax, other things. It's an ability to pay formulas. I don't need to educate you all on that. But that is not unique to Virginia. So to back up our assessment on the education funding, we looked at Maryland, we looked at Indiana, we looked at Illinois, we looked at California. All of those states had determined that tax increment financing done improperly, and in most cases, has adverse effect on education funding because you're walled off from that revenue source. So I think the resolution that you all adopted is a very important aspect. My hope is that if City Council does consider tax increment financing in the future, that they look at your resolution and find a way to some degree hold you harmless and negotiate those things. But it will also take, I think, some analytical effort on the part of the schools to engage in these types of development proposals going forward. So that's a quick overview from my perspective, Chair. I'd like to give Mr. Gerner just a moment to talk. He's created the financial model. He is a nationally recognized consultant in this area. Our financial model is out on the website and accessible to all of you if you want to look at development scenarios and start to make estimates about impact there. So, Mr. Gerner.
Okay.
Well, back in October, I did a presentation to the commission and a follow-up in December. And the main point that I made in both of those presentations was the impact of the financing on the future general fund. And at this moment, we're still with the 80-block TIF district. There was talk about the possibility of shrinking that, and of course everyone would like to do that, but at this time, because the state legislature today tabled the Jeff Bourne Bill, 1345, and unanimously did that with no sign that it will be retrieved, that at this moment we should assume that we're still at the 80-block TIF. And at the 80-block TIF district level, in the analysis that I did, which was based on the numbers from MuniCap, which is the same firm that did the financial analysis for the city and the developers. So we're all using the same financial numbers, using their numbers for the 80-block TIF, that if you look at the existing properties and the independently developed properties, which are the, at this moment, the second Dominion Tower is the biggest one. If you look at that one, the existing properties, which include the first Dominion Tower, and the independently developed new projects that are planned, which includes the second Dominion Tower. If you look at that over the next 30 years and what's expected from future incremental taxes. Now, for the new Dominion 2, all of that would be incremental. For the existing, it would be the amount above the 2020 proposed assessment level would be included. If you look at the next 30 years for all of those properties, in total, the amount of money is almost $400 million. So it is a substantial amount of money over the 30-year period. And with an accelerated payment schedule, which of course works to the benefit of reducing the overall cost of the project to the city, and also, of course, is of benefit to the bondholders. The disadvantage of that accelerated turbo process, which essentially takes half of whatever comes out of the Navy Hill Fund and puts it towards accelerating the bond payments. Now, during the initial years, what appears to be coming out of the Navy Hill Fund actually is only part of the money from these existing properties and the second Dominion Tower. So if you look at it from a year-by-year basis, and that was what I did in my December presentation, and if you go on to the Commission website, you can get the analysis for that, so I'm not going to go into the numbers. But that analysis looked at it year by year, saying here's their accelerated plan, here's what's going into the Navy Hill Fund from these existing properties in the second Dominion Tower, here's what's going to come out. And what that analysis essentially showed was that there really wasn't a substantial amount of money coming out of the Navy Hill Fund until the bonds have been paid off. And that's at a minimum of about 18 years. So almost 20 years from now would be the time in which the school system would finally receive the money that's been talked about for the project. Until then there would be, at times, a deficit, because more money would be going in from these existing properties than coming out. And therefore, because of that situation, I personally, as a member of the commission, and I can't speak for the entire commission, so I'm only speaking for myself here, I feel that you as a school board were justified in asking to be held harmless in the future, because essentially, if there is a deficit in money coming into the general fund and what's needed to go to pay the bonds, if there's a deficit, that there's less money that's coming in from the project itself, well, the difference has to come from somewhere. And with schools being one of the top budget items for the city, sadly, that would be the area that would be looked at. Well, can we take some of that money in order to make up this deficit? And so, personally, I feel that you were justified in doing that. The mayor, in response, has put forward a statement, at least, if not a more formal commitment to holding, to not holding the schools, to hold schools harmless. However, it should be noted, just like the mayor's resolution that's part of the Navy Hill papers, that the current mayor and the current city council cannot commit future councils, and it is council that actually makes the budget. Neither can commit the future city councils from doing whatever they want with a future budget. So it is aspirational what can be done. And in some ways, what you're doing is aspirational as well, but at least you're putting them on notice that indeed that would be the approach that you would want to do. And you would want to have much more systematic ways of making sure that you would not be at risk.
Thank you. All right. We'll have some comments or questions, but this is not an action item. So we don't want to keep these gentlemen too far past their bedtimes. All right. So we'll start with Mr. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will be brief because I had a lot to say on this subject at a preceding meeting. But first, I'd be remiss if I didn't convey personally my gratitude, Mr. Hemmer and Mr. Garner, for all of your work and your committee's work, and your committee took this task on with kind of professionalism that the city deserves and merits. So kudos. I would just point out, it seems to me that your committee, and in fact, Pierce, you referenced this a moment ago, among other things, your principal objective was to identify risk, and correct me if I misspeak, but it seems to me then for the policymakers, then it's to then now acknowledging the landscape of the rules of engagement informed with the risk that you have rightfully identified to Richmond Public Schools, then it's to prioritize. And I've made the point, and I'll make it again this evening at the risk of editorializing, it seems to me that the prioritization is, do we want a new Coliseum, or do we instead want what's the equivalent of hiring 200 teachers for the duration of their career, for 30 years? Long on the record stating that for me it's the latter, not the former. So I'll beat that drum one more time and share that I am so grateful to your committee for rightfully identifying the risk to Richmond Public Schools, and I pray that policy makers in this town will pick 200 teachers over a new Coliseum. Thank you.
Mr. Barlow.
Thank you. And Mr. Homer, Mr. Garner, thank you so much for your service on this committee, or the commission. I think, as Mr. Young noted, it was very important to our city to have an objective party or group of folks who are looking over these proposals. And it was really disconcerting, and it has been disconcerting to me throughout some of the Coliseum pitching that the school funding issue appeared to be a bit of an afterthought in some respects. And the LCI impact in particular, which I think could have a significant impact on our school system, already given that we have so much tax exempt property, is something that I'm glad that you took the opportunity to highlight and note as a risk for this project. So I don't want to pontificate too much more here, but I appreciate your insight and your effort, and hope that council and the mayor are listening as we voice concerns related to school funding and other issues with respect to how we would pay such an investment back. And would love to hear more from you independently if you ever have thoughts about how we can better advocate as a school board in these respects.
Good. Madam Chair, if I could just make one suggestion. I do believe in most of the other places in Virginia, schools are deeply involved in the development process. And I can tell you from personal experience that that is an afterthought in the Richmond development process. There needs to be impact on not just roads and not just jobs, but also schools. You've built brand new schools that have trailers shortly thereafter due to development decisions that were not coordinated with the schools. And that is unique in the Commonwealth, is very unique. And so building up those capabilities, I think, would do the school division a great service.
I'll just add that one of the comparable arena districts, other areas that have done arenas that the developer brought forward, was in Allentown. I did research of each one of these, and what I discovered in Allentown in particular was that that particular city by statute, cannot use its property taxes for bonds involving economic development projects. So that particular arena is paid for mainly through state taxes. In Kansas City is another example that was brought forward, and in that case, that arena is paid for by hotel and rental car taxes. And in the Columbus example, which has been brought forward as another arena district comparable project, that was privately financed originally. So there are other ways of doing these kinds of projects and other ways of financing them. And perhaps, as Mr. Homer just pointed out, again, this is not something that you can do as a body, but of course you can encourage council and the mayor perhaps to find ways to in a more systematic way, to ensure that there wouldn't be an exposure to the future school system.
Okay, Mr. Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my time is up.
Okay, I'm sorry. Ms. Gibson, then Dr. Sapini, Ms. Page.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again. I recognize you both spent many a Saturday morning and many hours in addition to that. And the final deliverable was really the documentation that the city really and residents should have seen, you know, much further on. One of the things that I have been taken aback by, honestly, in this process is the, is that the numbers seem to change so frequently. And so, where one moment the schools are seeing a windfall of $600 million, and then the windfall becomes $500 million, and then it's like $500 million, but that doesn't include what we would have had anyway. I mean, that really, I think, impacts the reliability of these types of projects, which do have significant impact on schools. For me, we said when we approved the meals tax that kids can't wait. And to now say that kids can wait 20 years, I just can't reconcile those things. And so that is why I have not been in support of the project. And so I am optimistic that council will do right. I was thankful to see their interest in striking the ordinances sooner rather than later. It has been frustrating to see at the kind of the 12th hour so many changes, and still with no detail, whether we're talking about the possibility of leaning on state tax, whether that is now, now we might hold the schools harmless, but really no plan into actually how that would look. And so hopefully we will see an end to this at the end of this month. And I agree that the schools really should have a seat at this table. And so I look to both the administration and my colleagues on getting ahead of that, because we know that there will be another proposal down, in the short term, no doubt. And I would like to ensure that we come to that conversation prepared.
Thank you. Dr. Sapini?
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is already within the plan, but just out of curiosity, the impact of, when you have, for example, a 203K loan, there's a contingency amount that's set aside. With this project, is there, or has anyone discussed anything like that, just for any foreseen circumstances, emergencies, or anything else pertaining to the deficit that could potentially happen?
I can only tell you from the numbers that I've seen. And in the original developer proposal that was prepared in February of 2018, they did have a cost breakdown. As far as the cost of the arena, for example, there was a line item for contingencies and unexpected costs as far as building that. So there was some expectation of the possibility of a need for contingency. As far as paying the bonds, the approach there, rather than having a line item like you just mentioned as far as contingency, the approach that the bond underwriters are using was to have a financing plan that provided a minimum of 1.5 expected revenues to what they would have to pay for the bonds. So with the understanding that that 0.5 extra would, that 50% additional of projected revenues, if we have a recession, for example, during the next few years, then that number comes down if this project is approved. And if there's a recession that brings down those numbers for a number of years, because of that 1.5 ratio, there was some assurance, at least to the bondholders, that there would be enough cushion to take care of some short-term economic or other problems. Say some of the planned development that was expected to be completed and open on a certain date for one reason or another isn't completed on time. So it could absorb those kinds of shocks. So in some ways, that payment plan is sort of a contingency approach.
But not necessarily to support the schools if there was a need.
No, I mean, there wasn't if you're thinking of a contingency as far as some future fund, just like, it's interesting that you mentioned it, because for the bond payments, there's actually what's called a reserve fund, which is, and initially it's part of the bond. They actually, the arena itself doesn't cost, right now, well, depending on which approach you're looking, it was $311, now it's down to $285. But of that amount, anywhere from $220 to $245, depending on what the arena costs, would actually go to build the arena. Some of that difference between that and the total bond was to capitalize a reserve fund. That was a built-in cushion to make sure that it could pay the bond payments for the first few years. It had those and as part of the debt payment, there was another fund that would be created to create another reserve fund. There would at least be, hypothetically, the possibility of some kind of reserve fund through such a financing plan that would be dedicated to perhaps compensating schools if indeed the funding didn't come through. I mean, there would at least hypothetically be that, but in this case, there wasn't such a contingency.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Page?
Thank you all for this information. Have a 2 points. So regarding the LCI, we're already losing funding for the LCI because of our real property value. Their formula is a skewed formula, so it portrays Richmond as having more of the ability to pay for education because of our real property value. So we're already losing money. And my next point is, and I would be remiss if I did not make this statement, because I heard you all say that building new schools and we had to add trailers. So those trailers were added because when people make adjustments to the zones, yes, it caused some schools to be overcrowded. So that's a misconception. But also there's been a discrepancy about school funding, how this project will or will not impact school funding. So, because I've been to several meetings and intentionally asked questions about school funding, and because I'd rather for my constituents to be informed versus misinformed. So, so there are some discrepancies about that information, and but thank you.
I did want to add this goes beyond this particular project, but as you were just pointing out, there are other aspects of the property tax system which work to the disadvantage of school because it gives the impression of there being more tax revenue from property taxes than the city actually collects. And part of that is currently being discussed outside of this project is the situation with tax abatements. And we looked at that as far as downtown and whether or not that would impact this project. And we were not able to get a clear understanding of that, although we met with the assessor. What we did get an understanding was that it is significant. There are hundreds of millions of dollars citywide that in tax abatement. So I know there's currently a discussion, and one that if that could affect school funding as well.
So I'm familiar with other TIF districts, Shore Pump, Chesterfield, Henrico, truly reaping the benefits. Also, TIF district in the city of Hampton through their economic development. So I've seen a transformation in the city of Hampton from where I went to school to now. So, there's a lot of information out there, but again, I'm not here to debate or belabor the point, so.
You're definitely right. There have been TIF districts elsewhere that's been brought up during our discussions at the commission. What is different about this situation is the size of the TIF district. For Short Pump, for example, that TIF district only included the shopping center itself, right, and was used to pay for, I believe, about $20 to $30 million of infrastructure improvements. It wasn't used to build the shopping center. It was built for those infrastructure
So the
improvements.
blocks have been reduced from 80 to, what, 8 or 10?
Well, the proposed plan, based on the state legislation passing, was to reduce the 80 blocks down to 11, which would be the 10 that would be the new development parcels themselves, plus the block with the 2 Dominion towers. So there would be.
Isn't that the new language?
There's not been an amendment made to actually do that. There's just been talk about it right now.
Thank you. And Ms. Cosby.
I'll be quick. Just wanted to thank you all for coming and sharing information about the report. Thank you for your work on the commission and what was an impartial study and bringing things up that have to be considered. And you were charged with what were the risks, are there any risks? And yes, we do know that there are, and for bringing these findings to us. And as a school board, I think it's something that we definitely have to keep in mind as no matter what happens going forward, and as we look at protecting the interests of our students. So thank you all for the information.
Thank you so much for coming, and we appreciate you staying up late with us tonight.
We've done it more than we care, yes. Madam Chair, and thank you for the great work that you all do. You have the most important job in the city. I worked decades ago to get elected school boards in the Commonwealth, so this is still an experiment where you have all the responsibility, but not necessarily the control you need to fulfill that. So I expect that relationship to continue to evolve, and we're here to help and support you in those efforts.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My first job out of college was as a public school teacher for a year. I made it through the entire year. I'm very proud of that. but out of that experience, I have the highest regard for our public school system.
Thank you. Okay. And Mr. Stanley, we're going to receive a legislative update. And Ms. Dr. Harris.
Thank you. I'm just going to set up Matthew a little bit. As you know, advocacy is a through line throughout the district, and out of the Office of Engagement, we are excited to give you some updates. Good evening, Chairwoman Owen, Vice Chair Burke, and Superintendent Cameras. We're about at the midway through the legislative session, and we are starting to see some progress on several critical advocacy issues, especially as it relates to our agenda. Last week, we saw meaningful progress on major revisions to the standards of quality funding formulas, including the proposal to create an equity fund. Again, this is probably the biggest opportunity we have to make meaningful reform to our education funding formulas. 24 states have already made education funding reform that accounts for students' socioeconomic status, and we hope to make that a reality in Virginia as well. Continue to talk to your constituents and emphasize the importance of this proposed legislation and encourage the advocate for its passage. We emailed you today a form letter with guidance on how to contact legislators at the request of several board members, and we actually shared two of those. The second one is a form where you can advocate for the creation of the statewide commission for school construction. Again, this is Bill SB 888. It was introduced by Senator McClellan, and again, this was a collaboration between RPS and the City Council. I just want to shout out Council Member Addison in working with us to advance this concept to create state-level leadership and new approaches to helping localities modernize our school buildings. This bill was unanimously supported by the Senate Rules Committee, and we are hoping it will pass the full Senate on Wednesday. Now, again, while the bill has received great support so far, we're going to need everyone to come through and advocate. I'm going to let Matthew go into detail regarding his presentation, but I would be remiss not to acknowledge the several advocacy activities that were supported throughout the month of January. We had advocacy trainings, an advocacy summit with over 100 people in attendance. If you were at the rally on Monday, RPS was well represented. People had t-shirts, posters. We were heavy in the march, but not just present, but we had on many of the posters as well as the t-shirts that people made out of love and then brought with them to the march. I just want to end by saying we believe that supporting advocacy is actually one of the key dimensions to an effective school and family partnership, and we want to continue to embed this in everything we do. Matthew?
Thank you. Good evening, Chairwoman Owen, Superintendent Cameras, members of the board. I appreciate Sade's introduction tonight and just a couple of the quick highlights that she was able to give. I wanted tonight to spend just a little bit of time talking about the Equity Fund. That is one of the proposed revisions to the standards of quality that Dr. Harris mentioned that did advance last week. Those SOQ bills are moving. They have been passed out of the subcommittees that they were first heard in. In the House, the bill has gone over to the Money Committee. In the Senate, it's going to be before a full committee this week. Those bills do all of the changes that the Board of Education recommended to the tune of about $497 million in state funding per year. Yes. So while they are moving forward at this juncture, we do expect that at some point the brakes are going to hit. Legislators are going to have to figure out how they are going to decide which pieces of those SOQ revisions they may want to prioritize and actually fund in the budget. Of course, I think as you are all well aware, the biggest one of those policy changes would be the creation of an equity fund. And just as a quick refresh, the concept of the equity fund would consolidate the at-risk add-on program, which we've talked about many times before, along with the prevention, intervention, and remediation funds so that you just have a single equity-based funding stream within the standards of quality. Right now we have almost a dozen, probably closer to 20 different funding streams that come to RPS. And so this is a way to start simplifying those more and make sure that we're tying one of those funding streams to socioeconomic status of our students. Now, to fund the board's recommended funding levels for the equity fund, the General Assembly will have to find some more money. They will have to look at for about an additional $91.8 million. That would go above and beyond the funds that the governor already proposed to add to the at-risk add-on program. But if they were to move forward with those funds, then all of them would be distributed to school divisions based on the formula, the factors used to send out at-risk add-on money, which is based on divisions' free lunch rates. So the proposal that the board is working on, it would allocate percentages, 10 to 65% additional SOQ positions to school divisions. So with Richmond being one of the top earners, we are the fifth highest ranked, or fifth lowest ranked, I guess, socioeconomic status in the state, we would get about 60% additional funding for SOQ positions under this proposal. Now, the way that the monies from the equity fund would have to be spent is that the Board of Education has basically provided a ratio of 70% of the funds through the equity fund are flexible use, just like the current at-risk add-on program is. So we would continue to be free to use those funds at our discretion to support students who are educationally at risk or need prevention, intervention, or remediation. Now, it's the other part of those funds, the rest of those funds, at least 30%, that has to go to providing targeted compensation adjustments and retaining experienced teachers in high poverty schools. That has really been one of the focuses that the Board of Education has looked at. So the new resources that would be provided through the consolidated program would go towards the schools in the division that do have the greatest concentrations of poverty. That is something that the district and the school board would have to prioritize, and then we would have to report on that annually to the Department of Education. So we are currently right now working with the VDOE and the staff of the money committees, House Appropriations and Senate Finance, to make sure that we're trying to understand the different options that the General Assembly has in front of them, whether they want to stick with the at-risk add-on program, and then what the changes would look like, whether they convert that into the equity fund based on the governor's proposed funding levels, or whether they take that a step further and actually fund the equity fund at the levels suggested by the Virginia Board of Education. We do have some initial financial analysis that the Board of Education prepared back in October 2019. Unfortunately, because that was before re-benchmarking and before the governor's budget, DOE has not yet released further analysis of what the new distributions would be to localities. So we are working with staff at the General Assembly to try to get that information so that we can really talk about what real numbers would look like and allow us to easier advocate for that program. So next week, we'll see further action on those bills. I think that it may be the first time that we get to see the money committee start to wrestle with that $497 million price tag for the overall bill, and then to start deciding what they want to do to find a way to actually fund maybe some of those changes like the equity fund. The House and the Senate are scheduled to release their budgets on February 16th. That will be the date that we actually know whether or not these different things are going to be funded. Even things that they pass before then, if it's not funded in their versions of the budget, then it's not ever going to actually happen. So February 16th is really the next big date on the calendar that we're looking at to know what type of funding decisions the General Assembly may be looking to make. So now really is the time to advocate. We do have those form letters. They are not yet on the website, but they will be up there soon. We initially have two form letters, one regarding the equity fund and another regarding school construction. We really will be posting those out on social media and really encouraging everyone to help advocate for those two priority issues at the moment. We do have our other priorities. I'm just going to run through the list really quickly so that we can be briefer tonight. Priority one is early childhood education. The big things in that is the governor's early childhood education funding package, which would expand access to 3-year-olds and allow for more mixed delivery. That is something that we haven't really heard a lot of action on yet. It's something that is just sitting there in the money committees waiting for them to see whether they include it in their budget or not. There is also the early childhood unification, which would move all of early childhood programs over to the Department of Education. That bill has been moving forward in the Senate, and I think it actually has already passed the Senate. So it looks like that will be moving forward. We have received a couple questions about that, but it sounds like the governor's team has thought through what that implementation process would look like. In regards to teacher compensation, we are waiting for the budgets to be released to see what might be done there, so I have no updates on that at this time. Support staff, there is lots of budget amendments again on that topic as well, but we are seeing movement on a couple specific support staff bills, like the school counselor bill. That has been moving forward to lower ratios for the next school year for FY21 down to the levels approved by the General Assembly last year. It was complicated how they didn't fully fund that, so they're moving forward with actually funding it. And then there's further step for the next fiscal year, FY22, to bring that ratio down to 1 to 250, which is for all schools, which is the national best practice. So those have been moving forward. There's been some other action on school nurses. We will wait to see if that is funded in the budget or not. Student discipline, the disorderly conduct bills have been moving forward. It passed in the House, I think, on a 61 to 35 vote, a little bit tighter than some of the other votes that have happened. So we will see what happens when that goes to the Senate. It has not been heard in Senate full committee yet, so still TBD on how the Senate will receive that. We think that it will move forward. And then there's also the bill that eliminates the requirement for school principals to file incident reports for all misdemeanors. And that has proceeded and passed out of the House as well. Have yet to see that happen in the Senate. Their priority 4 is regarding our topic regarding English language learner resources. I mentioned this before, but in the governor's budget, he has proposed funding to bring down the ratio of ELL teachers from 1 to 57 down to 1 to 50. There's also been another proposal that we've discussed that would tie ELL teacher ratios to student proficiency in English language. That is unfunded, and the House has actually already stripped out that language from the legislation. So it looks like that piece of the ELL changes may be in a bit of jeopardy. If that is something that is desired, I don't know that it's going to happen this year because there have not been budget amendments filed to actually fund that. So if the General Assembly were to move forward with that proficiency-based ratio, it would fall on school divisions to actually fund those ratios at the lower levels, and it would be an unfunded mandate. And then regarding priority 5, that is school construction. We have already discussed a bit of that tonight. We're very excited that that bill is going to the full Senate floor uncontested. We do expect that to come off the Senate floor and then over to the House, where the House Rules Committee will see that. So the Rules Committees are typically made up of some of the most senior legislators, leadership, and so we really encourage you, if you have any connections with House and/or Senate leadership, to please reach out to them and let them know your support for that School Construction Commission bill. I would also say that, unfortunately, the bills that are looking at studying the true cost of education and look at studying the local composite index have both died. The Senate Rules Committee killed those resolutions the same day they advanced our School Construction Commission, so you win some, you lose some. Finally, our legislative tracker has been updated. I sent that to you all on Friday. If there are any things that you would like to flag for the legislative committee to review, please send those to me by tomorrow so that we have time to prepare for reviewing them with the committee on Thursday night. And then finally, form letters, which we've already discussed. So that's my presentation for tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Stanley, for a very comprehensive and helpful presentation. And maybe I should just talk to offline or Google it, but I'm curious to know about the LCI study and what I think long-term I'd love to see some traction on this idea. If we're not even willing to look at the core issues of the formula, that's disconcerting. So I'm curious to know if there was any kind of regional or notable regional or ideological breakdowns with respect to taking a look at the sort of underpinnings of LCI.
Yes, so the LCI study and the True Cost of Education study were both killed purely based on the fact that they were going to be JLARC studies, and JLARC is at capacity with the studies that they already have on the table. There was direction from the chair of the committee that they would like JLARC to look at whether either of those topics can be folded into existing work that's happening. So that issue is not completely off the table. It's just not going to proceed as a standalone bill.
Thank you, Mr. Stanley.
Thank you.
Okay. Administration business, 10.1. Finalist names for George Mason, ESH Green, and the new middle school on Hull Street.
Good evening again. I am here to present the recommendations regarding our school renamings. Today we are going to be talking about 3 of our schools. Amelia Street is still in the process of holding hearings as we had tonight, and then we will present those recommendations at our next board meeting. I want to start with just first our announcement. The school board declared officially to rename Green Elementary School, George Mason Elementary School, and the new middle school on Hull Street, as well as Amelia Street last year. The public had an opportunity to submit online submissions that we've all shared with you. Those submissions went to each of our renaming teams and were updated throughout the process. In addition to that, we held public hearings at the school communities that were under consideration. And lastly, each school community had renaming teams. I do want to acknowledge the principals who were here earlier today. They weren't able to stay the full meeting, but they were all here and wanted to just show their support and appreciation for the process. They had various stakeholders on their renaming teams. They made sure to include student input, holding student votes at all of the schools, as well as family surveys and community events where they could solicit input. As a result, the renaming teams then submitted that information to the RPS administration for review. So I'm excited to share with you for E.H. Green. You can see a list of many of the names that were submitted. And the top 3 finalists for E.H. Green were Cardinal Elementary School, Dogwood Elementary School, Southside Elementary School. Again, next to each one, shared a little bit about why these names stood out to the committee. Cardinal Elementary School, again, as you heard tonight, is the Virginia State Board, and the renaming team would like to point out that cardinals are also found in Central and South America, where most current Green families are from. The administration's recommendation is to accept the renaming team's top choice of Cardinal Elementary School as the new name for E.S.H. Green Elementary School. The next school you'll see is a variety of names that were submitted for the new middle school on Hull Street. The 3 top finalists were River City Middle School, RVA Middle School Academy, and Southside Middle School Academy. The renaming team found that the community really wanted to focus on geographic names that would bring the new school community together, and of those 3 finalists, felt River City Middle School would do so best. The administration recommends accepting the renaming team's top choice of River City Middle School Academy for the new middle school on Hull Street. And then last but not least, you'll see some of the names for George Mason Elementary School, which include Henry L. Marsh Elementary School, Church Hill Elementary School, Rosa Dixon Browser Elementary School, and Ethel Bailey Furman Elementary School. The renaming team put forth 2 recommendations. They had an even tie between Henry L. Marsh and Church Hill Elementary School. After consideration, the administration has recommended Henry L. Marsh Elementary School for the new name of George Mason Elementary School, and we feel it is selected to honor one of the most important civil rights icons in Richmond history. That concludes the administration's recommendations. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Mr. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Sade. I am going to again extend an invite that I did last year to my colleagues, and I do hope that we will do something perfectly soon that we have to date not done, and specifically that is to have a serious, genuine discussion and deliberation relevant as it relates to how we reconcile often 2 truisms. I voted against the renaming initiative last year, and I will renew my objection this evening. But I specifically want to speak in the context of one of the schools, and specifically George Mason. I hope that this board is mature enough to have a genuine conversation about how we reconcile, how we continue to tell our story, tell a story relevant to somebody who was a participant in our original sin, and someone, like so many of our founding fathers, committed arguably an unforgivable act. And someone, that same someone, who was, if we repeal George Mason, strike him, if you will, from history, we will, in a few words or less, be repealing freedom of religion and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and separation of powers and due process and the idea that our rights originate from the Creator and are bestowed to the people, and then we give a little of that to the government, unlike the entire human experiment prior to what we did here in America. My point is to say that George Mason was author of Virginia Declaration of Rights, and by all account, said declaration constituted the inspiration for what would become the Bill of Rights. What's more, George Mason and his Virginia Declaration of Rights arguably was the impetus in some way what become Declaration of Independence. So I share that to say that I recognize my limitations pertinent to my wisdom, and I'm not sure how we as a people reconcile those two truisms. Somebody who, on the one hand, is guilty of this unforgivable sin, on the other hand, is responsible for changing the world forever by providing what we know as the American experiment. But I do think I have at least enough sense to know that it merits some very genuine discussion and deliberations. And this board has not done that. And I think that that is most unfortunate. And candidly, our constituents, persons in the city of Richmond, deserve more and deserve better than that. Thank you.
Ms. Burke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad that there are 9 of us, and we all are entitled to our own opinions. However, when Mr. Mason wrote the Bill of Rights, people who look like me were possessions. So far as changing the whole world, my voice is trembling, because I believe a change has come to the city of Richmond, and we just have to keep pushing and keep encouraging. But sometimes change is good. Change is good. So when we speak of Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Rights, I still don't enjoy all of them.
Mr. Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think Ms. Burke made a very powerful comment there. And I'd like to follow up on it by saying, although many of these ideas may have been originated by George Mason, that Henry Marsh in particular fought to ensure that people in this city and in this country had the ability to be recognized and have those rights. And there are still challenges coming forward, but I do think it's notable that we have a local hero from that neighborhood who has worked to, in an odd way, extend the legacy of those ideals by extending the practice and extending those rights further to folks who are disenfranchised in many ways. So I understand it is a tough thing to wrestle with, the ideals versus the sins of some of our forefathers, but at the same time, I can't think of a more perfect person to consider for the name of this school as someone who made us be true to those words. So I'd be happy to support Henry Marsh, and I'm particularly excited about it. And to be frank, Henry Marsh is from Richmond, There's enough Northern Virginia influence trickling through the city, and that's where George Mason was from, so maybe it's time to recognize Richmonder here.
Thank you. And we will not vote on this tonight. This will be a later, next time decision. Any other? Ms. Gibson.
I appreciate this discussion, and my point is, you know, I mean, as it pertains to the names, I think that, you know, when we look back at history, that, you know, our lens changes, and I am of the mindset that, you know, we can change the name, we can take the monuments down, we can, you know, we will have a new interpretation of history, and that's okay. And so, you know, and I know there are many, you know, because people have changing perceptions about people, that they would prefer a more, you know, a name that's not connected with a person. But I do think that there is a poignance and a, you know, something that is very much uniquely this place in the people, in celebrating them. I think there's merit to that. And so I am pleased to see that we are, you know, looking to raise the interests of the people in the community in this process. The only question that I have is with the name for the new middle school on Hull Street. All of the schools have academy in the name, and so my question is really more the rationale for that. My concern is that there might be some misperception that it's a specialty school. I know that, you know, at the state, they call the governor's school, many of the governor's school programs, academies, and so you know, I'm just wondering, you know, what is the rationale for calling it an academy when at this point there is not a specialty schools program at that building?
The renaming school, the renaming team, I would have to follow up with Principal Murphy. I know during original conversations, they thought academy for them sounded very distinguished. I don't think they were thinking in terms of like a specialty academy, but I think wanted to kind of set themselves apart as any kind of renaming school would do. So I know in their initial conversations, they felt it sounded very regal, but I can get more insight on that for you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harris. Okay. 10.02, receive an update on the grandfathering process for rezoning.
I'm here again, Chair Owen. So grandfathering, just want to give everyone a brief update and let everyone know that students in rising 5th, 8th, and 12th grades whose zone was impacted for the 2020-21 school year were all sent personalized letters last week detailing the grandfathering decision and the instructions if they decided to either, so they can indicate what their decision will be. All families have until Tuesday, February 11th to make their decision and return their form to school. Several schools have also held rezoning update meetings for families and communities. What myself and Mr. Hughes are working on is just compiling a list of when all those dates are in case you would like to attend. Some of them, for instance, like Cary Elementary, we were a part of that and supported any administration that's reached out for support. But we've asked all principals to hold multiple meetings at their school, at least one by the end of February, and then those who have impacted zones, another one in the spring as they work to bring all of their students and new community members together. But just wanted to let you know those notifications have went out, detailed letters to families just explaining the process, how to check their zones, and then that will be ongoing over the next couple months. We want to make sure every family knows where they are zoned for next year.
Thank you. I have one
Yes.
question. There's not going to be the same thing in the South Side, but do families know who currently attend Elkhart Thompson that they're not automatically going to the new middle school on Hull Street? Have they been told that they have there's some that will go to Lucille Brown and some that will go to the new middle school? And have they, especially those, you know, rising 8th graders and even rising 5th graders, do they know where they're zoned to go as they make this decision?
So I know right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Simmons, we were just focusing on grandfathering to make sure that we were able to do everything within the deadline. The next group of students we'll be notifying are students who will be changing locations based on the reconstruction of the new schools. Is that correct?
Okay, thank you.
Yes, everyone, but I think you were talking about, did they receive like a personalized letter?
Yes, and I mean, there's students at Broad Rock, for instance, you know, who have been rezoned to go to the new green. And so as they make their decision about grandfathering, are those students also knowing that they've been rezoned?
Well, every student received a letter to utilize the rezoning map to see where they are zoned. So that's every single student. In terms of a personalized letter, we sent it just to students who were impacted for the boundary changes.
So if I may, every rising 5th grader who is being rezoned, every rising 8th grader who's being rezoned, every rising 12th grader who's being rezoned received a communication saying, you're being rezoned. Do you want to stay where you are?
Okay.
And that process is ongoing over the next couple of weeks. Opportunities at school to let us know, which is distinct from you're a rising 2nd grader.
Right.
We're going to get to you in a second.
But my concern really is I have had parents who really did not understand that we're building this new middle school, and they just assume that everybody who's currently at Elkhart Thompson will go to the new middle school, but that's not the case.
That's the next round of
But I'm just saying, as they are making their decision about whether they want, you know, what they want to do, and of course, we're almost out of time, I guess, for if they wanted to do a change of school other than the one they're zoned for. It's just, I just want everybody to know, and sending them out a letter saying this is how you can find it on the website works well for parents who have a computer or regularly visit their public library to use the computer, but I can tell you for certain sure that is not all my families.
Absolutely, which is why I think the school-based meetings will also be helpful, as well as the outreach that principals have been doing to their school communities. I know schools have had several, different schools have already reached out to families offering support for those who need support. But we will continue to make sure that every family knows.
And you've already figured out which kids at Broad Rock, for instance?
Yes, anyone, we know who those students are. Every student we know now. We can type in any address and showcase where they're zoned for next year. I think in terms of direct communication, that personalized letter, especially for students who may be thinking, we want to be explicit about that already as well. But everyone, to this point, would be able to see where they're zoned for next year.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Now, we have some informational items. So they're all on board docs, so we don't need to talk about those. Is there any new business? Say no. Okay, how about announcements? No? All right, we're good? Oh, my goodness. It's only 10:30, and we just have closed. Okay. I'm ready. Read it on.
No, I'm wrong.
All right, pursuant to sections 2.2-3711, A2 and 7 of the Code of Virginia, 1950 as amended, I move that the school board of the city of Richmond convene in closed session to consider the admission or disciplinary matters or any other matters that would involve the disclosure of information contained in a scholastic record concerning a Richmond Public School student, for consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members or consultants pertaining to actual litigation where such consultation or briefing in open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the school board, and/or consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the school board regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel in litigation matters number 2019-01, 2019-02, 2019-03, 2019-04, 2019-05, and 2019-06.
Second. Do we take a, just?
All in favor?
All in favor? All right, let's move to room 120.
No, I was 112. The room I taught in.
Oh, really?